Note: this video contains spoilers for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Also note: the events described in this video took place from May to September 2023. This is not clickbait! After a grand total of 815 hours, I've officially 100%ed the map in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, totally blind, and I looked up nothing. That's right, I seriously found, completely by myself, every single korok, shrine, map tower, main location, cave, chasm, well, specialty shop, town, etc. And not even once in my whole playthrough did I reference any strategy guides, video walkthroughs, FAQs, completionist maps, online forums, or advice from friends to help me with the game. Nor did I rely on social media, even accidentally. Cause see, on my accounts, I muted the most common words associated with the game, like Zelda, Tears, TOTK, Ultra Hand, Korok, etc. Even in Japanese. They were muted months before the game even came out, actually. And I did that mostly to avoid story spoilers, but conveniently, it also allowed me to dodge all online talk about the game that could influence how I tackled my playthrough. So yeah, at the end of the day, I basically locked myself in a huge Zelda-proof tower where no talk about Tears of the Kingdom could even touch me. And thanks to that, I can really truly say that I 100%ed the game's map completely on my own without any outside help. Important disclaimer here though. When I say I 100%ed the map on my own, I don't mean I 100%ed the whole game on my own. Because see, map completion is different from true game completion. The former requires you to find only a select number of things that are tracked by your map, while the latter has you finding pretty much every key item and completing all quests and activities in the game. Now at the end of the day, I did get really close to true 100%. Because like, the same path I took to complete the map also just naturally led me to most of the key items and quests in the game too. More on that later. But it wasn't close enough. Ultimately, I just couldn't help missing a few things that I needed for a perfect file. And that's why I'm not saying I 100%ed the whole game on my own. Because strictly speaking, I didn't. I 100%ed the map, and the map doesn't track everything you need for a totally complete game. That was fine though. Like, to be honest, I was never really trying to perfectly complete Tears on my own. Why? Well, simply because I saw no way of verifying the criteria for true 100% without online resources. Like, the game gives you literally nothing to help you identify what exactly counts towards a totally complete file. And what that basically means is that if I actually did attempt a guideless true 100% run, I'd be stumbling in the dark the whole time. Like, I'd have to guess literally every single little thing I needed to clear that goal, and that would have been hell. Also, there was no way I was getting all 228 of those food recipes on my own. Like, it was just flat out impossible to know what most of those even were without a guide. And that's not to say that everything was clear-cut in guideless map 100%, it wasn't. But at least in that category, the game gives you a handy-dandy map completion counter displayed in the bottom right corner of your map. There was nothing like that for true 100%. Granted, you couldn't see that counter until you completed the story, but when you did complete the story, it tracked your progress really well. And you could deduce what contributed to map completion by looking at that counter and taking note of the things you found that made it go up. So yeah, for those of you wondering, that's why I pulled through guideless map 100%, but not guideless true 100%. I did get close to that latter feat again, but ultimately there was just too much guesswork there for me to tolerate, you know? I was still super proud of myself for that former feat though, because even if true 100% is harder, map 100% is no slouch. I mean, to complete the map in Tears, you have to find a crazy amount of stuff in an absolutely gargantuan open world. I mean, there are seriously over 2,400 different discoveries you need to make in that behemoth of the land that is Hyrule. And to find that much stuff on your own in such a huge game without any sort of reference sheet is nothing short of insanity. Which I dare say begs the following question. Why did I decide to attempt that feat in the first place? Like, what chaotic force of nature compelled me to think up such an insane challenge and say, yeah, I want to try that? Well, it's kind of a tricky question to answer, honestly, because, see, when I first started Tears of the Kingdom, I actually didn't plan on committing to any sort of crazy challenge. Like, the only, and I mean only thing I decided to do at the outset was just play the game without looking up anything. At least for a while, and that was mainly so that I could really immerse myself in that world and appreciate it more. Like, I figured, okay, if I completely tune out the online world while playing this game, at least for a while, then I'll get way more personally invested in the adventure. And that in turn would make for way better memories in the long run. So yeah, from the moment I picked up that game, I'd completely sworn off guides. I didn't really know how long I'd go without them though. See, I was kind of in this weird place where like, I didn't want to look stuff up now, but I wasn't necessarily opposed to looking stuff up later if I got stumped. But then, oddly enough, that later just never seemed to come. Like, even after playing the game casually for 50, 100, 200 hours and more, still without guides, I still felt like I was in that now phase. Because nothing was really stumping me as I played, you know? I mean, Sure, there were plenty of times where the game would trip me up for a bit, but I always kind of found that after a good hour or two, or just by taking a short break, I'd be able to work through the problem at hand by myself. Of course, it also really helped that the game was really easy to cheese. And here's the real clincher. I just had tons of fun figuring stuff out by myself. Like, it was genuinely thrilling for me to work through all those puzzles and stuff completely on my own without any outside help. Really made me feel like I was forging my own path through uncharted territory, you know? And that just made for such a satisfying adventure. But yeah, to make a long story short, it basically just got to the point where, like, I was finding so much stuff in Tears on my own casually and enjoying that process so much that I figured I may as well just commit to a full guideless map 100% playthrough. Because here's the thing. After a point, I knew I wanted to keep progressing through the game by myself, and I also knew I wanted to find as much stuff in it as possible. So ultimately, I just couldn't help thinking it just made sense for me to officially try completing the game without guides. It did take me a while to reach that conclusion, though. Like, I don't think I officially started attempting that challenge until I'd casually traversed, like, half of Hyrule's regions. And here's why. You can probably guess the reason. I was just really intimidated by the prospect initially. Like, in the beginning, I seriously thought that finding every single map discovery on my own would just be way too much. Cause see, I remember there was a map quest in Breath of the Wild too, and the conditions for completing it were ridiculous. Like, that game seriously had you finding over 1,300 different map discoveries in that massive open world. And I did pull that off back in the day. Twice actually, once on normal and then again on hero mode. But it took a long time, and heck, I was using guides in that game. Imagine how long it would have taken me if I did everything myself. And I just didn't know if I wanted to put that much work into Tears. I mean, sure, for all I knew, Nintendo could have made the map quest in Tears easier than Breath of the Wild, but I really doubted that possibility, because the game just seemed to love carrying over stuff from Breath of the Wild, which makes sense, right? I mean, Tears is a sequel after all. You know how things like that tend to go, though. Like, sure, initially, yeah, I was put off by the thought of doing such a difficult challenge, but over time, as I kept playing the game, somehow the idea grew on me. Kind of like coffee, you know? Like, you taste it for the first time and it comes off as super bitter and unappealing, but over time, as you keep tasting it, you come to enjoy the flavor. And in the same way, the longer I played Tears without looking stuff up, the more I realized that I really enjoyed finding things in the game on my own. And at the end of the day, that just made me think, like, you know, if I'm having this much fun flying solo now, then I might just welcome the challenge of trying to complete the whole map by myself. After all, technically a challenge like that should only serve to prolong all the fun I'm having currently, and why would I not want more fun, you know? So yeah, that's one thing that influenced my decision. And here's another. So, remember when I said a few minutes ago that I used guides to complete Breath of the Wild's map? Well, I really lamented that after the fact, because I know it sounds silly, but for me it resulted in a playthrough that I just didn't feel that immersed in. I mean, again, I did pour a lot of time into the game, and I accomplished a lot too, but since I was constantly looking at online maps, checklists, FAQs, etc. to help me through it, I came away feeling like I just didn't really own my own playthrough. Like I wasn't really playing the game myself, I was letting the internet play it for me. And ultimately I just didn't like that feeling at all. Like, it really just left a bad taste in my mouth. But why did I want to get so immersed in that game? Well, to be honest, it really just came down to the fact that I saw Breath of the Wild as a masterpiece. Like, that game just struck me as an incredible work of art on so many levels. And in that respect, I just couldn't help feeling it deserved way more of my attention/energy. Because it really left my cup overflowing, you know? Like, it was too good to just breeze through with a guide. I had to put more of myself into it. And obviously by saying that, I don't mean to knock anyone who looks stuff up while playing Breath of the Wild. Everyone should play it however they want. I'm just saying that I personally felt that looking stuff up took me out of the game too much and kept me from appreciating it for everything it was worth. And I really didn't want that happening again in Tears. Like, after everything that went down in Breath of the Wild, I honestly felt obligated to give Tears my all. Like, I felt I just had to savor the experience and do justice to what I knew would be another incredible adventure, you know? So yeah, that was another thing that pushed me to take on that challenge. And here is one more motivator. I knew that if, against all odds, I actually managed to complete the map on my own, I would be insanely proud of myself. And for two reasons. Firstly, because I'd have done something that takes a crapload of focus, commitment, and sheer freaking will to pull off. And secondly, because I'd have accomplished a feat which I'd never seen anyone even think about doing. At least in Breath of the Wild. I wasn't too sure about Tears because again, I tuned out that game on social media. Also, not gonna lie, I kinda did that challenge just for the lols too. Like, I just thought it would be way too funny if I pulled off this one insane feat that nobody would believe if I told them. Or there's nobody who hasn't considered that insane things like that can only be done by insane people like me. Anyway though, I think that more or less covers all the whys, so let me address some of the hows now. And I'll start with the biggest one here, which I dare say is, how can I prove that I did what I said I did? In other words, where's the evidence of my apparent feat? Like, do I actually have undeniable, empirical proof that I completed the map in tears blind without looking up anything? Well, I'm very glad you asked, because the fact of the matter is that I do not. But wait, before you click off this video, consider one thing for a moment. What kind of evidence could I produce to prove a feat like that? And I'm being dead serious with that question here. Like, for real, how could I practically show that I never once looked up a guide or anything in the 4 or 5 months I was playing this game? I mean, I could show you my internet search history, but we all know I could have edited that. Or I could give you the testimony of my brother who witnessed a lot of the journey, but he could be lying for all you know. So I don't know. Honestly, it's a really tricky thing. Like, I genuinely have no idea how I can show without a shadow of a doubt that I actually did what I said I did. I mean, even if I pulled off the feat in one sitting and live streamed my entire 800-hour playthrough, I still could have easily looked stuff up on my phone between bathroom breaks without anyone knowing. Because yes, call me weird, but I know I need to use the bathroom at least once within 800 hours. I'm strange like that. I don't know. Maybe a stream like that still would have been worth something, but honestly, I don't see how I could have made it happen anyway. I mean, there's no way my internet/computer would have been able to handle a stream that long. Heck, it was hard enough to get this video up. So yeah, I can't technically show proof of my feat with a stream or anything, but you know, I kind of want to say that's still okay. Because look guys, this feat may be crazy, it may be hard to believe, but things which are hard to believe happen all the time in our world. Like, I'm sure you all have stories you can tell me about seemingly impossible things that happened to you in your life before. That's just how things go in this wild existence of ours. Kind of felt the need to rephrase this part. What I should have said here was, I'm sure you've all pulled off equally crazy accomplishments of your own that you could brag to me about. And it could be anything really. Video game stuff, job stuff, life-related stuff, etc. I mean, let's face it, the concept of a crazy accomplishment is pretty broad. With all that being said though, there is at least one key part of my playthrough that I can verify, and that's my playtime. Like, I can actually legitimately prove I spent 800 plus hours in Tears of the Kingdom. That info's in my Nintendo Switch profile, and you can confirm that for yourself by looking up my friend code. And I really feel like that record gives some credence to my claims. After all, if I truly was looking stuff up during my playthrough, I wouldn't have needed to play for as long as 800 hours, you know? Cause look guys, it is true that Tears of the Kingdom is a massive game, but it's not massive in the way that would keep you playing for 800 plus hours under normal circumstances. I mean, if you go to howlongtobeat.com and look up the average clear times for Tears of the Kingdom, you can see that the most thorough run completionist, aka true 100%, generally takes just 240 hours to pull off, which needless to say is a far cry from the 800 hours that I put into my playthrough. And I know, proving that I played the game for that long doesn't exactly prove that I completed it entirely on my own, but it does support the possibility. After all, just think, if I truly did complete Tears of the Kingdom's map completely by myself with no guides or anything to help me along, my resulting playthrough would obviously be insanely long, much longer than the average completionist run with guides. Because, you know, having no guides means you gotta figure out everything in the game with your own little pea-brain. And that can take a crazy amount of trial and error, which can lead to your wasting a crazy amount of time in the game. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got in terms of proof, or anything resembling proof. Wish I had more, obviously, but, you know, it's just really hard to prove that you beat a game without looking up anything. So hey, what could I say? I mean, in the end, all I can do is just tell people about my crazy achievement and hope they believe in my craziness enough to trust I'm not lying. That said, though, I don't mean to push my story on anyone. I mean, you know, I'd appreciate your belief in me, but look guys, if what I say just genuinely strikes you as too insane to accept, then by all means don't accept it. Like, no joke, I'd be 100% cool with that. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure I'd believe my tale either if I heard it from someone else. Sorry, second day of recording. Funny story here real quick. Around the time Breath of the Wild came out, I stumbled across a Reddit thread that went something like this. OP, how are some folks on the internet actually saying they found every single Korok in this game without looking up anything? Reply, by lying. A bit overly frank perhaps, but that reply got a ton of upvotes, most likely from people who were convinced that that feat was just impossible in the game. And you know what? I was one of those upvoters. And that'll tell you just how little faith I had in that whole idea originally. Like, in the beginning, I figured a feat like that would just take way more patience than you can realistically expect from the average gamer. So yeah, again, I get it if you can't find it in you to trust me. I mean, I've been down that path myself lots of times. And you know, it's all cool. I mean, heck, there are plenty of days I don't trust myself either. But hey, even if you can't believe me, I'd like to still encourage you to hear me out. After all, you might still be entertained by my story even if you can't believe it. And if you do feel you can trust me, well, you have my sincerest thanks. Because at the end of the day, I'm not making the story up. It's 100% true. And I know that for sure because I lived it. And with that elephant in the room addressed, I think it's about time we move on to the main meat of this video. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is the story of how exactly I 100%ed the map in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom blind without looking up anything. Enjoy. Alright, so let me just say straight up that even though I say I did this challenge blind, and I did, I also didn't really. Because here's the thing. While I truly didn't have any experience with Tears before I started playing it, I had a ton of experience with its prequel, Breath of the Wild. Because again, I map 100%ed that game twice, albeit with guides. And honestly, there's a ton that those two games shared in common. Like, they had the same enemies, mechanics, characters, collectibles, and most importantly, the same world. And because of that, it wasn't too hard for me to get my footing in Tears even though I'd never played it before. Like, a lot of it was familiar to me from the last game. Sure, there was plenty of new stuff too, but in general it was pretty recognizable territory. So, you know, I didn't really feel like I was going into Tears blind, even though I technically was. Like, so much stuff carried over from the last game that it kind of just felt like I was picking up my playthrough from Breath of the Wild, you know? So yeah, that laid some good groundwork for my challenge. And then how did I build onto that foundation? Well, to ensure I was finding as many map discoveries as possible wherever I went in the game, I followed a super thorough exploration method that I put together with the help of two very handy in-game tools that I stumbled across earlier in my playthrough. And before I get into that method, I want to talk about those two tools for a bit, because honestly there was a lot to them, and I feel like you have to understand all their pros and cons to properly understand the strategy I put together with them. So what were those tools? Well, the first one was Hero's Path mode. What was Hero's Path mode? Well, it was a feature attached to the Pura pad which allowed you to see your travel route on the map for up to 256 hours of exploration. And that was a huge help to me because obviously I couldn't remember every single little place I explored in that huge world, and I needed to know everywhere I explored in order to narrow down which places I should search next. Although Hero's Path didn't exactly show me everywhere I'd explored in Hyrule. Because here was the thing. That feature operated solely on a 2D plane, like it only tracked distance, it didn't track height, so I couldn't rely on it to keep tabs on which of the many layers of Hyrule I'd explored. Let me demonstrate the problem. So here's a Hero's Path trail of mine going into a cave under Gerudo Summit, and the trail makes it look like I'm going along the top of the summit, but obviously I'm not, I'm super far down, but because Hero's Path only records distance, you can't tell that at all, which in my opinion was really dumb. Although honestly that problem wasn't just the fault of Hero's Path, the map's overly simple layout was also to blame. Because see, the map only shows you the top layer of Hyrule period, like it doesn't separate vastly different heights into different layers that you can toggle between like on a dungeon map. And this basically means that if you venture under a surface displayed on the map, like again say you're going into a cave under a mountain, you're kind of just wandering blind, because the map's layout isn't designed to show you anything straight down from the topmost level. And I gotta say, that really made exploration a pain for me, because there's a lot of ground to cover below the topmost level of certain areas. Like, think of all the ledges under cliffs, tunnels under random walls, and smaller sky islands under bigger sky islands that you see all throughout Hyrule. Like, all of those spots can be home to koroks and other things you need for map 100%, so it's genuinely inconvenient that you can't see them on the map. Now to be fair, the game did make it clear which elevations that could be seen on the map were higher and lower. Higher elevations were marked by lighter tones, and lower elevations by darker. And you know, that was helpful to an extent, but it still wasn't any substitute for a floor toggle feature. Like, I really wanted a floor toggle feature for the overworld maps like the dungeon maps had. Although to be fair again, I honestly have no idea how Nintendo would have made something like that for the overworld. Like for dungeon maps, a floor toggle feature works because dungeons are smaller spaces with only about 10 or so levels that are easy to organize into isolated layers. But the overworld's different. The overworld is a super massive, super complex space with dozens, maybe even hundreds of different height gradations. And it's just hard for me to see how so many levels of height spread across such a gargantuan land could be organized well into layers you can toggle between on the map. I mean, sure, hypothetically, Nintendo could have assigned a map tab to every single level of the overworld, but Let's face it, that would have been kind of insane. I mean, imagine sifting through dozens of layers on your map like some crazy Photoshop project. I mean, completionists would have liked it, maybe, but it would be incredibly overwhelming for the average player. So yeah, I feel like I understood why the overworld had just one layer. Like, ultimately, that kind of setup is just way easier on the eyes and brain, and for most people, an easy-to-read map probably matters way more than a complex map which gives you a better view of the overworld. Even if I did understand all that, though, I still just couldn't help being kind of annoyed. Because on account of that map's overly simple layout, I had to do a ton of double takes on so many places I explored. Like the Great Sky Islands, for example. I think I had to scour that place like 5 times over before I was convinced I'd found everything there. Because in that area, there were a lot of higher islands eclipsing lower ones. And you know, I never was able to come up with a solution for that problem. Like, that dumb map was just one of those things I had to put up with and get used to throughout the whole game. There was no way to fix it. But hey, you know, it wasn't the end of the world for me. I mean, yeah, I was annoyed by the map's layout because it had me doing a lot of pointless wandering. At the same time, though, I kind of expected to be doing a lot of pointless wandering, you know? Like, whether or not the map was helpful. I mean, heck, I was trying to complete the map with no guides for crying out loud. Like, let's face it, if I didn't expect to be getting super lost from time to time, I'd have been pretty delusional. And then, you know, the map wasn't a train wreck per se. Like, it may not have shown me everything I wanted to see, but it did show me most things. Like, I'd say it helped me find a good 80% of what I needed to find for my challenge. Which was a lot, you know? And I can't take that for granted. So yeah, even if the map did get on my nerves a lot, even if I found it dumb, I'm still grateful for it at the end of the day. And that goes for Hero's Path too. Like, even though that feature can only track distance and not height, I was really appreciative for that. Because at the end of the day, there was a lot more distance than height that I had to cover in Tears, as you might expect. So yeah, that was a deal with Hero's Path, and the map too was a bonus. And now let me talk about the other thing I used to put together my special exploration method, which I swear I haven't forgotten about. It's just taken me a while to get to that, sorry. And that thing was none other than the one and only Korok Mask. So the Korok Mask was awesome too. Why? Well, because it alerted you to nearby Koroks you hadn't found yet. Like, if you enter an area and there's a Korok there you haven't discovered yet, the mask will suddenly start rattling to tip you off to its whereabouts. And that was a huge help to me, because here's the deal in case you don't know. There are hundreds of Koroks hidden everywhere throughout Hyrule that you need to find for map 100%. And they were insanely easy to miss without that mask, because, see, the game isn't eager at all to help you track them down in that gargantuan world. Like, you can't set them as targets on your Purapad sensor, there were no NPCs that tip you off to any of their hiding places, and they're never marked on the map until you actually find them. Also, their hiding places, or maybe I should say the puzzles you had to solve to uncover them, those were super varied. Like, they took so many different forms. I mean, you can find Koroks by lifting rocks, shooting acorns, jumping in water rings, solving block puzzles, hitting balloons, landing on ground targets, chasing sparkling trails, undoing log corks. The list goes on and on. There are like 20 different puzzles in total. And it's just really hard to keep an eye out for that much stuff at once in the overworld, you know? I mean, depending on where you are, you might not have to look out for some of that stuff. Like, you know you're never going to find a water ring on dry land, for example, but most of those puzzles didn't show up in just one kind of spot. Like, they could be found in literally every climate of Hyrule. And that basically meant that when I wanted to find all Koroks in an area myself before I got the Korok Mask, I had to memorize the appearances of about 20 different puzzles and keep them at the top of my brain every second as I explored. And that was really tricky, especially since most of those puzzles were really small and didn't stand out much in the landscape. It was kind of like having to watch dozens of security cameras in a big warehouse to find a few pesky rodents, you know? Also, without the mask, I honestly felt compelled to manually inspect every single weird little thing that came into my path for Koroks. Like lift every rock, climb every tree, dive into every pond, etc. Because again, those Koroks could be hiding literally anywhere. And needless to say, that process took me an insanely long time. And it made me look nuts. Like, I kept thinking to myself while I was doing that, man, if anyone were to come by and watch this method of mine, they'd think I was absolutely bonkers. Because I swear to God, I looked like I had no idea how to play the game. Although, important side note, and this is gonna sound silly too, but believe it or not, I actually didn't necessarily mind checking every nook and cranny like that. I mean, yeah, it was time consuming, yeah, it made me look crazy, but at the same time, that's how I play most games. Like, I don't usually make a straight dash to my main story objective. My general tendency is to linger in a place and scour every corner of that place for hidden items before moving on. Just because I like exploring, you know? And I can't stand missing stuff. Anyway though, with all that said, I think it's pretty easy to see why I was so happy when I got the Korok Mask. Like, That thing's ability to detect nearby koroks brought actual, genuine order to an insanely chaotic quest. The mask wasn't anywhere near perfect though, and I do really want to stress that. Like, for one thing, the detection range was pretty short. Like, the mask would only ring off when I was about 30 steps away from a korok on flat terrain, which, to size that up, was only about 1/3 to 1/4 the range of the puripad sensor. And let me provide a map for you to help you visualize that distance better. So here where I've placed this purple pin is where a korok is, and here where I'm positioned is the very edge of the line where my mask starts to detect that korok. As you can see, it's pretty short. Now let's translate that to a 3D view. Here you can see Link with the mask, and the korok, in this case it's a korok leaf stump, is right up there. Kind of blurry, but you can just make it out. Now, let's see how long it takes to get there by running. So about 6 seconds and 26 steps, which again is a very short distance. Now let's compare that to the puripad sensor with a random treasure chest set as the target. Here's the treasure chest marked by a red pin, and then way over here where I am is where the puripad sensor starts picking up that chest, which is a lot further. And to make that even clearer, here's another video of my running to that goal from the same map position. So 28 seconds and 120 steps. Quite the difference, eh? And this is why I wish you could track koroks with your puripad. Granted, this isn't a perfect one-to-one comparison. After all, these are two different areas with different terrains. But I'd like to think this gives you a rough idea of just how much worse the Korok Mask Raider was compared to the puripads. And here was another problem with that mask. You may have noticed this already if you were paying attention to those videos, but the mask doesn't tell you which direction the korok's in, or whether you're getting closer or further away from it. It just lets you know that there is a korok nearby, period. And that wasn't a huge deal, honestly, since the detection range was so short, but it still kind of left me disoriented at times. Like, you'd be surprised how lost you can get within 30 steps of a place. Also, wearing that mask made me a lot slower and weaker than I normally would have been, because A, it only had one defense point that couldn't be upgraded, and B, it didn't grant me any effects or set bonuses which could have vastly improved my attack, speed, environmental hazard resistance, and so on. And that made my adventure quite a bit more difficult, I gotta say. I mean, granted I could swap the mask out for a better head item anytime I wanted, but I had to be careful about that, you know? Because I never knew when I'd come across a korok that I needed the mask to help me find. And the last problem with the mask was, well, it just looks stupid. Like, seriously, I just couldn't take Link seriously when he was wearing that thing, which honestly was rough because I wanted to take him seriously. I mean, he was the hero of Hyrule who vanquished the world-bending threat of Calamity Ganon, for crying out loud. And while nobody else in the game seemed to remember that for some weird reason that frankly left me baffled, looking at you especially, Mr. Nintendo Teacher, I know that I sure as heck did. So to see this great warrior, this lion-hearted champion, this sheer legend named Link running around Hyrule with this kooky-looking leaf thing glued to his face, kinda just threw my world for a loop. Never mind the fact that I beat Calamity Ganon in the last game wearing caveman attire. And don't even get me started on the story cutscenes with Link in them. Like, I just had to take the mask off for those. Otherwise I couldn't focus on the story at all. Like, I'd be too busy laughing at Link's derpy face. But hey, in the end it was what it was. I mean, yeah, the mask had problems. It wasn't a perfect tool, but hey, at any rate, its radar saved me from having to overturn every odd rock and climb every strange tree I came across to find koroks. And that saved me a ton of time, seriously. I mean, I still obviously had to explore places really thoroughly with the mask to ensure I was finding all those little guys, but I didn't have to be as crazy thorough as before when I didn't have the mask. Okay, so now that I've talked about both Hero's Path mode and the Korok Mask, let me finally describe the special exploration method I came up with using those tools, which helped me to find as many map discoveries as possible. And this strategy evolved a bit over time, but I basically ended up doing this. Firstly, I'd pull up the map in the region I wanted to search, because I wanted to go through each region of Hyrule one by one. Then once I had the map up, I'd zoom in super closely to see how the landscape was arranged. Now in most cases, with the exception of only like 2 regions I'd say, there were a lot of cliffs and plateaus making up the landscape. I'd take note of all those more elevated areas, walk over to them one by one, and then with the help of Hero's Path, I'd start tracing a trail along the entire length of where I perceived their edges to be, even if I didn't see anything interesting there. there. And I did that because those were the spots where I was 1000% most likely to miss stuff, the edges. Like, it's easy to see things that are in the center of an area, but where they're off on the side, they're kind of out of sight, out of mind, you know? And also, by going along the edges, I gave my Korok mask more room to detect koroks hiding along the walls below me, which was super important because not only are those places major blind spots, but they don't show up on the map at all. And then once I combed the edges, I started filling in the center of the area I outlined. And I did this basically by zigzagging from one end of the area to the other, making sure I left just enough space in the middle to where A, I was exploring the whole area without wasting too much time making trails, and B, respecting the Korok mask 30-step detection range. And then once I finished with the upper levels, I moved down to the lower levels and, you know, more or less tried to repeat that same process. I.e., find the edges of an area, make a trail along those edges, and then fill in the space I made with that trail. And that way I felt like I was able to maximize the surface area I explored without running around too much. Although it was kind of tricky because, like, a lot of places just didn't have very clearly defined edges that I could easily apply my strategy to. Like, there were tons of areas that kind of just blended into other areas for what looked like miles. So a lot of times I had to just draw my own imaginary edges, you know? Like, if an area was just going on and on to the point where it was too much for me to explore at once, I'd cut it off at a certain point with a hero's path trail, and then treat that trail just like an edge. And that way I could tackle exploration in smaller, more manageable sections that didn't get me too overwhelmed. And I did that basically until the whole region was covered in my tracks, which on average I'd say took me about 16 to 24 hours. And that's counting the time it took me to get through all the shrines and caves I found there. Now I know what you're thinking here. You're thinking, hey man, what the heck? Like, this method is serious overkill. Like, you're wasting so much time combing empty space here. It's just ridiculous. And you're not wrong. It kind of was, but I mean, hey, what do I say? Like, that's just what I felt I had to do to complete the map without guides. Because seriously, the things I had to find for map 100% were spread out everywhere in that gargantuan open world, and again, the game just wasn't eager to help me find most of that stuff. So I kind of had no choice but to do a huge manual sweep, even if it did mean that I waste a ton of time searching spots where nothing was around. Like, if you're trying to locate hundreds upon hundreds of different things that can be found anywhere in this massive space, and you got nothing to guide you in the process, all you can do is start scouring everywhere on foot. Although it wasn't really everywhere, actually. Like, I didn't bother scouring shrines, dungeons, and most of the depths. I still explored those places well, mind you, but I wasn't hyper-fixating on them in the same way as other places, because I came to notice that the only things that shrines and dungeons had in them were treasure chests, which I didn't need for map 100%. And as for the depths, there was a lot of stuff I needed down there, sure, but I felt like I could find that stuff easily enough with just the map. Or, well, when I found the light routes anyway. Because see, the depths were a lot more barren than the surface, and the map reflects that. Like, if you open it up and look around, you can see that's nowhere near as densely packed with stuff as a surface map. Like, there's a lot more blank space. So when there was a map discovery to be found down there, like an abandoned mine, for example, it kind of stood out like a sore thumb, you know? So I didn't really feel like I needed to get up close and personal with the depths. Like, it seemed like almost everything I needed down there I could see on the map already. Also, there were no koroks in the depths. I deduced that pretty soon after exploring there for the first time. And that alone told me I could be way more laid back with exploration there, because seriously, it was mainly because of the koroks that I felt the need to explore the surface so thoroughly. Because those guys were hiding around every freaking corner of the surface, and you hardly ever saw their puzzles on the map, so you basically had to scope them out in person. And there was just a lot more stuff to find on the surface versus the depths in general. Like, in the depths you only had to find like 5 different categories of things, but on the surface, it's like 15 different categories. And that's only counting the map discoveries. If you throw in the surface collectibles that aren't map discoveries, that number gets even bigger. Sorry, third day of recording. I should probably move this so I don't crush it under my elbow. Speaking of which, let me go over those different categories a bit and talk about how easy/hard they were to find. So in addition to koroks, which I already talked enough about, I also had to locate the following: shrines, skyview towers, light routes, caves, towns, villages, stables, shops, chasm entrances, device dispensers, tears of the dragon, forge constructs and refineries, ancient tablets, great fairy fountains, wells, and most numerously, named locations, which were basically special landmarks with names attached to them. That's a lot to go through, I know, but I promise I'll try to keep this brief. So among the simplest things to find were the towns, villages, and stables, and that was mostly because 99% of the towns, villages, and stables and tiers were carried over from Breath of the Wild, which, again, I knew very well. They were in the exact same places. Then there were the Great Fairy Fountains, which also weren't that bad. I mean, their locations and tiers were different from Breath of the Wild, but I still found them fairly quickly because the NPCs talked about them a lot. I always made a point of talking to every NPC I met, by the way, and I'm really glad I did because they helped me find a ton of stuff, the biggest thing being the location of the Master Sword. Then there were the chasms, which were kind of a mixed bag. Like, I'd say about 85% of the time they were easy to find because they had very distinct appearances, both on the surface and on the map. About 15% of the time, though, they'd be hidden away in places that the surface map just didn't show and which were completely out of sight. Like this chasm in a cave under Rito Village. That one took me ages to notice because it was in a super awkward spot that I couldn't see from the map. Because once again, the map doesn't show underlevels like that. That was definitely more the exception rather than the rule, though. Like, in general, I found that even the trickier chasms stood out enough to where I couldn't miss them too easily, especially given how thoroughly I was exploring the surface, you know? Then there were device dispensers, forge constructs, refineries, and Tears of the Dragon, and I'm grouping these all together because they were all things that I'd say found me rather than the other way around. Like, I know it sounds odd, but I didn't find myself actively looking for any of that stuff during my adventure. It all just came into my path naturally while I was scouring Hyrule. Like, I think there were only 2 forge constructs I had to backtrack for at the end of the day, but that was about it. Like, all the other stuff kind of just fell into my lap. Especially the Tears of the Dragon. Like, those geoglyphs were so big, I couldn't miss them even if I wanted to. Then there were the Skyview Towers, which were pretty simple too. I mean, obviously I couldn't use the map to track those down because, you know, the towers were the things that gave me the map, but they were still really easy to find because they were super tall and stood out in the landscape. Then there were the Ancient Tablets, which were kind of another mixed bag. Like, I didn't have much trouble locating those. That part was fine since the sky islands that the tablets were tied to were easy to see due to their unique star shape. What I did have trouble with sometimes, though, was getting to the tablets because some of those sky islands were really high up and far out, like, so much so that I couldn't just glide to them. I had to construct flying machines or use rockets to cover the distance. And then there were the shrines, light routes, caves, wells, and named locations, and I'm just gonna call these the Big Five for easy reference. Now, these were among the trickier things to find in the game, and they weren't nearly as hard as the Koroks, granted, but they still had me on a bit of a wild goose chase. And here's why. Each of the Big Five categories had tons of stuff to their name, and they were all over the place. Like, on the surface and in the sky, there are 152 shrines, 147 caves, and 58 wells. In the depths, there were 120 light routes, and in all of those realms combined, there were about 700 named locations. And here was another problem I had with the Big Five. I couldn't rely on the map to help me track down most of those categories. Or if I could, it was really hard. After all, shrines never showed up on the map until you got close to them. Caves weren't usually displayed because those were usually along walls, and the map's top-down view obscures walls. Wells were rendered too tiny for you to see easily, and also they didn't have a consistent appearance. Light routes couldn't be seen before you found them because those were just like the Skyview Towers. They were the things that gave you your map in the depths. And named locations, well, most of those were on the map technically, but since they weren't labeled until you discovered them and they all looked completely different, it was often hard to distinguish them. At least as far as the surface was concerned, because again, the surface was just packed with interesting landmarks around every corner, and oftentimes the unnamed locations, which I didn't have to find, looked just as special as the named ones. In time though, and with a lot of trial and error, I eventually was able to come up with other ways to track down the Big Five without the map. Like for the shrines, I figured out I could A, place them as a target on my pad, B, reference the shrine quests on the pause menu, and C, follow their green/yellow light spirals, which really stood out in the landscape, even from a distance. As for wells, those were another thing I could track with my pad sensor. As for caves, I was able to get the Lord of the Mountain to highlight those places with light pillars of cherry trees, and also by talking to Colton, who told me where the caves with bubble gems in them were. And also by chasing down the Satori rabbits I found here and there. As for the light routes, I could follow the bright orange glow they gave off in the depths, which was always easy to see because the depths were so dark before you activated the light routes. As for named locations, I found those by just, well, combing the map from top to bottom. Yeah, actually I was getting no breaks with those. The game for some reason just didn't want me to find the named locations. I had to go out of my way to hunt those down manually too, just like with the Koroks. That process wasn't nearly as bad as it was with the Koroks though, because here's the thing. I didn't know where a lot of the Koroks were in tiers, but I did know where a lot of the named locations were, because a lot of those carried over from Breath of the Wild, which, again, I knew very well. Like, Lake Floria was still there, Death Mountain was still there, the Colosseum ruins were still there. You get the idea. Which makes sense, right? I mean, this is the same world as Breath of the Wild, and the story's set just 2 or 3 years later, so yeah, of course a lot of the old landmarks would still be around. Granted, there were a ton of new locations too that I'd never seen before, like everywhere in the depths in the sky was new to me, for example, but honestly those places weren't that hard for me to find. Cause again, there was a lot of empty space in the depths in the sky, so special areas usually stood out more there. On the surface, on the other hand, there was not a lot of blank space. Like, again, the surface was just packed with stuff around every corner. So all in all, I feel like it was really hard objectively to find named locations in that realm, but it wasn't too tough on me because I remembered a lot of those locations from the last game. Of course, it also really helped that after a point I was scouring tiers in a way that just made it really hard for me to miss stuff like that. And that goes for a lot of the categories I mentioned actually. Like, honestly, I found that once I'd refined my overall exploration strategy, I didn't need to spend nearly as much effort into hunting down individual map discoveries, because I just naturally find that stuff while slowly but steadily working my way through the whole world using that strategy. Which also makes sense, right? I mean, when you're making a point to go everywhere in a game like this, you kind of just happen to run into most of the things you need without looking for them, because you're just being super thorough by default, you know? And that's not to say my exploration strategy was foolproof, but it was really good. Like, honestly, I didn't end up missing much stuff when I integrated it. Now at this point I want to talk about how easy/difficult those regions were to explore. Quick disclaimer before I get into that though, I'm primarily going to be focusing on the surface regions here. Like, I don't intend to talk much about the depths, or even the sky for that matter. And that's for this reason mainly. Most of the places in the depths in the sky just didn't give me that much trouble to talk about. Like, overall, those areas were way simpler than the surface, and there were exceptions obviously, and I will talk about those, but honestly, I say that for every hour I spent exploring the depths/sky, I spent like 50 hours exploring the surface. Again though, there were exceptions, and this first place I want to talk about was one of them actually. It's the Great Sky Islands. And you know, this place wasn't technically its own region. It was linked to Hyrule Field on the surface, but I'm treating it like its own region anyway, because that's what it felt like to me. Anyway though, the Great Sky Islands was the first place that I officially started scouring with the exploration strat I made for my challenge. And to be clear, this wasn't during my first run of the area right at the beginning of the game. It was much later. We're talking like 50 to 100 hours into my playthrough here, which, you know, was when I officially decided to try for map 100%. Granted, I'd searched that area pretty well from the start too, but obviously back then I couldn't say I'd scoured it. I mean, I didn't really have the means to without Hero's Path or the Korok Mask. And that also goes for the next 8 or so regions I'm going to talk about after this one actually. Like, my scouring trips didn't really start coinciding with my first time trips until I'd already wandered through like half of Hyrule's regions and finished like 2 main story quests. I can see this causing confusion down the line, so let me quickly draw out what exactly I did. So when I first started the game, I was exploring casually with no guides for 50 to 100 hours, primarily in central and northern Hyrule in this order. Then when I got to the last region in this order, I more or less decided to start my crazy challenge. At which point, I backtracked to the other regions I'd been exploring casually until then, and started scouring them with my Hero's Path strat for map 100%. And then, I continued scouring the rest of Hyrule until the end. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's move on. And how'd that first scouring session go? Well, I thought it would be a pretty simple process at the beginning. After all, the Great Sky Islands were A, a much smaller territory compared to other regions, and B, seemed to have a lot of clearly defined edges, which on paper made my scouring strat easier to pull off. That's what it seemed like anyway. The reality was a little more complicated though. See, it's true that those islands were smaller and easier to sort through, but they were packed with stuff. Like, there were so many koroks crammed into that place, way more than I usually find in such a small area. Also, I kind of went into this a bit earlier, but there were a lot of smaller islands hiding under bigger ones in that region. And those islands were really hard to keep track of because the map's top-down layout didn't render them. Oh, and then there was a Temple of Time. Yeah, I actually ended up running along every level of that massive place from the outside because I was paranoid about missing stuff. There was nothing there though, just a steward construct at the top with a boring side quest for me. So yeah, the Great Sky Islands were a lot trickier than I expected. Like, as I said earlier, I think I had to comb that place like 5 times over before I felt like I'd found everything there, because it was just really easy to miss stuff in that place. And then from there I proceeded to comb Hyrule Field, which honestly I don't have a whole lot to say about. I mean, that area was pretty cinchy. I mean, it was big and it had a lot of stuff in it, but almost all of that stuff was easy to find because the terrain was really flat and open. There was one exception though. Hyrule Castle. Hyrule Castle was a ton of work to explore, and that was for 4 reasons. Number 1, the monsters in that place were tough. Number 2, there were literally dozens of koroks and named locations to be found there. Number 3, there was gloom everywhere. And number 4, it had so many layers. And while the game did give me a handy-dandy dungeon map to navigate the floors on the floating portion of the castle, it left me high and dry for the grounded portion. Like, I only had the single-layer surface map to help me in that area. And that was a huge pain because I obviously couldn't use that to navigate the mines and caves under Hyrule Castle, and those are pretty extensive areas. So yeah, I ended up having to do a lot of backtracking in that area too. Like, I think I went through that place over 5 times as well, because I just kept missing stuff. I also had a little trouble with the Great Plateau and Satori Mountains further south of the region, because, you know, those areas had more cliffs and trees which blocked my view of things I had to find. That wasn't too big of a deal though. I mean, the cliffs and trees weren't nearly as dense there as in other places. Then I made my way west to Hyrule Ridge, and that area was really tough, and that was particularly because of one specific place in it. Tanagar Canyon. Why was Tanagar Canyon a pain? Well, mostly because the cliffs bordering the canyon were crazy tall, and since they were crazy tall, I couldn't always trust my mask to detect any koroks that could be hiding along them. Cause remember, the Korok mask's radar only has a range of about 30 steps, both horizontally and vertically, and those cliffs were much higher than 30 steps. So what'd I do to compensate for that? Well, I basically just did my best to glide down the middle of those cliffs to cover the difference in range, and also really keep my eyes peeled for any gaps/ledges where koroks could be hiding. That wasn't easy at all though, because here's the thing. That canyon stretched on for miles upon miles, and there were so many nooks and crannies along those cliffs where korok puzzles could be perched. So yeah, I was there for a long time, just cruising around on my glider trying to spot anything that looked even slightly out of place. Regardless of how long/hard I searched though, it was really difficult for me to move on from that area, because I kept feeling like I was missing stuff there. Like, it was just that hard for me to believe I was exploring this insanely complex series of cliffs thoroughly, you know? Ironically though, I actually was. Like, believe it or not, there were only like 5 or so koroks hanging out on those cliffs at the end of the day, and I want to say I found them all on my first go. Classic, right? I had no way to know that at the time though, so that was another place I kept coming back to throughout the course of my adventure. And then the other areas I found kinda tricky in Hyrule Ridge were Sarah's Scablands and Ludfo's Bog, mainly because of those weird mushroom trees. Like, the tops of those mushroom trees just screamed Korok hiding place to me, but it wasn't easy getting up there to check them out, because a lot of those trees were really tall and too awkward for me to just climb up. Like, I needed to use capsules or something to clear the distance. But hey, that was fine. I mean, fortunately I always had enough capsules to go around. And let me also talk about the sky section of Hyrule Ridge for a second here. Or at least one part of it. That part being Lightcast Island. Now, I didn't end up spending that much time in Lightcast Island, but it still stands out in my mind for one reason. That was the only place in the whole game where I missed the shrine I had to come back for later. Why? Well, here's the deal. Turns out that during my first pass, I just forgot to enter that shrine after solving the island's puzzle. Like, I'd opened the place, it was good to go, but somehow I neglected to actually go into it. Like, I just flew off and left it hanging. Crazy, right? Like, I really have no idea what happened there. And then following Hyrule Ridge, I made my way to Hebra, which I kinda wanna say was the hardest region to explore in the game. And there were a few reasons for that. Firstly, there was a ton of snowfall in the area, which was problematic because in this game, snowfall fogs up the landscape and makes it difficult for you to see things you might need to find in the area. And there was also this issue. Hebra was made up of tons of massive cliffs that blocked my view of my surroundings. So I basically had 2 big visibility problems stacked one right on top of the other. So yeah, it was not easy finding things in that region at all. Especially, you guessed it, the koroks. Because again, most of the korok puzzles were pretty small, and that being the case, they were very easily obscured by fog and large obstacles like cliffs. And I couldn't always rely on my korok mask to detect those guys either. Like, that 30-step detection range just didn't go very far in a huge mountain range with crazy high cliffs. Also, because Hebra's terrain had tons of layers that overlapped like a huge lasagna, the map there was virtually useless. Like, its single-layer format hid so many undersurfaces from my view, way more than the average region. And I lamented that big time, because, again, there was often a lot of important stuff camping out on those undersurfaces. So yeah, Hebra was just a massive pain overall. Like, that was another region that I constantly felt compelled to come back to and re-explore. because it represented such a huge blind spot, you know? And in a place like that, it's just super hard to convince yourself you haven't missed something somewhere, no matter how many times you scour it. The story quest in Hyrule was fine though, like I didn't have too much trouble helping out Tulin. Which was actually way earlier in my playthrough, by the way. Like, I did that long before I officially started scouring Hyrule for my challenge. I'm gonna talk about it anyway though, just cuz. And that was for two reasons. Number one, the quest was just really simple. And number two, the game was generally very eager to help me with story stuff. Like, most of the tasks I had to perform to move the story along were outlined on the main quest tab of the Pad, and the sites I had to visit would usually be marked by a gold pin on the map too. So most of the time it was pretty easy for me to figure out where to go and what to do to progress the plot. What about the dungeons, though? Surely those were hard since the Pad doesn't give you tips for the dungeon puzzles, right? Well, honestly, not really. I mean, those are definitely tougher, but all said and done, I didn't find them that bad. And here's why. Even if the game didn't give me many tips for the puzzles, what it did give me was A, the locations of every switch I needed to find to complete the dungeon, and B, an actually good map that let me toggle between all the floors and thus track my progress better. And I honestly found those things to be more than enough help, especially since I only needed to clear the dungeons. I didn't need to scour them for map discoveries. Why, you ask? Well, because with the exception of Hyrule Castle, there weren't any map discoveries in dungeons. There were only treasure chests, which the game didn't require you to find for map 100%. How'd I know that? Well, technically I didn't since I couldn't look it up, but I felt it was a safe enough guess. After all, there were no map discoveries in Breath of the Wild's dungeons, and I knew that for a fact. Actually, a little clarification on that note. According to IGN's interactive map, there are like 3 or 4 named locations in the Lightning Temple, but I honestly don't know if those counted towards map 100%, because even if they do come up in the game, they don't show up on the main map at all, so yeah, kind of hard to tell what's going on there. Kind of doesn't really matter though, because I believe you need to find those locations in order to clear the dungeon, so I wasn't going to miss them anyway. So yeah, when I got to exploring the Sky Dungeon in Hyrule, it was generally pretty smooth sailing, no pun intended. I mean, some of the puzzles tripped me up for a bit, but nothing really stumped me there. Like, I think I cleared it in just about an hour or something. Love the boss there, by the way. Like, wow, that fight just gave me huge Wind Waker vibes, and I was so down for that. Then after Hyrule, I made my way to Tabantha, and that area was a bit easier. I mean, I still had the snow and plenty of cliffs to deal with, but fortunately Tabantha wasn't nearly as mountainous as Hyrule. Like, it had a lot more open space and was pretty easy to explore, particularly in the middle where it's mostly flat snowfields. Sure, there was also a labyrinth there too with a pretty complex maze, but honestly I didn't have much trouble with those in general. Like, I usually found I could cheese through them quickly enough by approaching them from the top. You guessed it, 4th day recording. Want some, bud? And then I went through Great Hyrule Forest, and that place presented a really unique set of challenges, I gotta say. Why do I say that? Well, mainly because of Lost Woods. Like, for quite a while, I just couldn't figure out how to get through that place and into Korok Forest. So this Lost Woods story also takes place before I started scouring Hyrule, and that may make it seem kinda out of place, but I wanted to talk about it anyway, because getting through that area the first time without guides was quite an ordeal. Because see, every time I tried running in there from the entrance, within like 5 seconds I'd be thrown out of the place by the magical fog surrounding the area. And that just kept happening, like, no matter which direction / angle I approached from, and I can assure you I tried dozens, I'd always get sent packing by the fog. Which surprised me, honestly, because see, I remember being able to navigate that fog pretty easily in Breath of the Wild. Like, all I had to do to get through it in that game was light a torch and then follow the direction the embers were blowing in. That didn't work in Tears though. I mean, I still could light a torch, but the embers of that torch wouldn't guide me in any particular direction. Like, they just drift upward in a neutral position. So I was genuinely pretty lost in Lost Woods for a while, and I tried other things too, like talking to NPCs, using different items, doing various side quests, but none of that stuff helped me at all. So in the end, I figured I just had to find a way around Lost Woods, like try to skip that area entirely and locate another, more direct route to Korok Forest. So my next plan was to take to the skies and see if I could just dive straight into Korok Forest from a nearby sky island. Unfortunately though, when I actually tried that out, I met with the same result as before. Like, I was able to at least touch the ground of Korok Forest, but the very instant I landed, I'd be thrown out of the place by the same fog. And that ruled out approaching the place from the sides and the top, so the only other option as far as I could tell was to try to find a way in from the bottom. And that led me to the depths below Lost Woods, which thankfully was a lot easier to explore because there wasn't any fog down there like on the surface. And that's where I finally found my solution. Turns out there was a tower in the depths that was positioned directly underneath Korok Forest, and by using my ascend ability under it, I was able to completely bypass Lost Woods and jump straight to that land of the Leaf Heads. Which, let me tell you, I was really proud of myself when I figured that out. I mean, it took a lot of trial and error, but in the end I got it completely on my own, and that just left me so satisfied. And then, of course, after finding Korok Forest, I just had to take some extra time to chase down the Master Sword. That whole process was pretty straightforward though, so honestly I don't feel the need to talk about it much. Like honestly, the only thing I really want to say there is that I love the setting for the Master Sword quest. Like, the whole atmosphere with the dragon and all was just so epic and magical. It was literally like watching a fairy tale in motion, and I just adored that. Anyway though, I had a pretty easy time exploring the rest of Great Hyrule Forest. Some places were a little tricky on account of the hilly terrain, but overall it wasn't that bad. I mean, no place was so hilly that I couldn't see where I was going. And obviously I'll take hills over mountains any day of the week in this game. By the way, speaking of mountains, my next region was Eldin. And this region I'd say was the second hardest one to explore in the game. Like, in my opinion, it was only a step or two below Hebra in terms of difficulty. And I think it's pretty easy to guess why. Like, no matter which way you look at it, you can tell that area is just mountain madness. I mean, the terrain's super uneven, there are crazy tall cliffs everywhere blocking your view, and the landscape's made up of so many overlapping elevations that you can't see on the map. So yeah, that was another area that I spent a ton of time exploring, and particularly around Death Mountain. Like, I must have spiraled around that place like 10 or 20 times in total. Cause seriously, that volcano was huge and it had just a crazy amount of nooks and crannies that were super easy to miss. And on that note, Eldin was actually yet another place that was so complex I kept thinking I was missing stuff there, even when I wasn't. As for Eldin's story quest, that was pretty straightforward. Like, I didn't have too much trouble helping out Unibo. I mean, you pretty much just had to beat him up in a cave and then go carting around with him on Death Mountain. Oh, and then defeat the boss at the top. That was actually a pretty cool fight now that I think about it. And this quest too I did before my Scouring Saga, by the way. I'm sorry to have to say that again, but don't worry, it's the last time. The rest of the story quest coincided with my full region sweeps. As for the fire dungeon, that place took me a bit of time to clear, I'll admit. Reason being that the layout of that place was really complex, and I found it kind of difficult to navigate between floors even with a good dungeon map. All in all though, it wasn't terrible, it just took me a little longer to figure out compared to most places, you know? The boss there was cinchy though. Then I moved on to Akala, and that place was kind of a mixed bag. Like, it was a pretty even spread of both uneven mountainous areas and flat open areas. That said, I found that even the most mountainous areas in Akala weren't too hard on me. At any rate, I didn't get hung up over anywhere there like I did in some other regions. I mean, I did spend a lot of time searching Akala, but I didn't feel the need to, like, scour the place like 5 times over like I did in Hebra and Eldin, for example. Like, I was pretty confident I found just about everything there after my first really thorough sweep of the area. Because it was complex, but it wasn't that complex, you know? At least comparatively speaking. Then I went on to explore Lenevru, and honestly, this area was just a nightmare for me. Why? Well, I can tell you in just 2 words. Overhangs! Everywhere! Yeah, seriously, Lenevru was overhang central. Like, there were so many straight ledges jutting off from the cliffs in that region, particularly in the area around Zora's domain. Why were those ledges a problem? Well, because they tended to overlap with each other in an obtuse angle going up. And in that position, their surfaces were super hard to see, on the map especially, but also in person. And let me show you an example of that. So here I am on top of one of those cliffs, and I'm curious what's below me, right? So I'm gonna tilt my camera down to take a look, and I don't see anything, because that cliff face is in the way. When I jump down though, voila! Suddenly another ledge appears that I couldn't see from the top. Now there wasn't anything on that particular ledge, of course, but the fact was there easily could have been. I mean, I can't tell you how many koroks I found on surfaces just like that one in the past, so it was genuinely inconvenient that those Lenevru cliffs like to obscure them. Anyway though, Lenevru was another place I felt compelled to obsess over. Like, I spent way too much time trying to find and inspect every last one of those ledges, mainly because I couldn't trust that my mask would pick up on any koroks that were along such high elevations. Here's a funny story though. Turns out there actually wasn't that much stuff on those ledges at the end of the day. Like, the vast majority of them were bare. There were only a couple that had map discoveries on them. So it was basically a repeat of Tanagar Canyon, where I ended up wasting countless hours inspecting obscure cliffs that looked like they'd have stuff on them, but actually didn't, or for the most part anyway. And as for Lenevru's story quest, I found that to be more or less as simple as Hebra and Eldin's. The only thing I would say that stumped me a bit there was the puzzle where you had to shoot an arrow through the green sky shards arranged like a teardrop. Like, it just took me a while to figure out what exactly I had to do there. I was really satisfied when I did solve that puzzle though. Like when I was finally able to make out that teardrop, it was a real aha moment for me. Like, I just thought the idea behind that whole puzzle was just genius. And the water dungeon in the sky was cool too. I mean, I didn't find it that hard on account of its overall simple floor layout, but it was a lot of good fun riding up waterfalls and hitching rides on huge bubbles to get around. Oh, and being able to jump higher due to low gravity was awesome too. Then after that place, I waltzed into Lanayru Wetlands and West Necluda. And I'd say it was around this time that I really perfected my exploration method, because like I said before, the way I went about exploring Hyrule kind of changed over time. I tried to be consistent with my strategy, obviously, but there were certain parts of it that took some getting used to. Like for example, it took me a while to get a good feel for the range of the Korok Mask's radar and figure out the best way to respect that range as I explored. And I think that's another reason I had such a hard time exploring those earlier regions like Hyrule, you know? Because I hadn't quite locked in my technique at that point. It was like any new thing, really. I had to practice it for a certain amount of time to get it just right. But yeah, like I was saying, by the time I got to Lanayru Wetlands / West Necluda, I felt like I'd really mastered that strat of mine. And here's the reason I felt that way. It just seemed to me like exploration became a lot more manageable from that point on, like, and I don't know, maybe it was because those southern regions were just objectively easier to explore, but I just had this sense that I was able to scour places much more methodically after leaving northern Lanayru. Like, I actually felt like I knew what I was doing from that point on. That said, Lanayru Wetlands / West Necluda was a huge region with tons of ground to cover, so even if I did feel like I had my method down, it still took me a while to explore there. Like, I think I was at that place for like 3 days straight trying to find everything. Thankfully, though, the landscape wasn't that complicated. I mean, the south side had some pretty big hills, but I didn't feel like those got in my way that much. One exception to that rule, though. Dueling Peaks, located at the very bottom of the region. Now that place, I'll admit, gave me trouble, because it was another series of huge cliffs with lots of layers that I couldn't find easily. And again, the map obscured the spots I needed to see most there. Like this ledge right here. There was actually a Korok there, but on the map you can't see the place. It's completely eclipsed by the surface above it. And then the other place in that region, which I got a bit hung up over, was the Zonite Forge Island in the sky. Because that was another relatively complex place with lots of height layers that made exploration trickier. Like, there were 8 circular towers of different heights surrounding the island from the outside, and I had to examine all of those from different angles to ensure I wasn't missing anything, which, as you can imagine, took quite a bit of time. I'm glad I did that though, because there were quite a few Koroks there. And then there was the inside of the place, which features this really long vertical tunnel with 6 lasers that you have to skydive through. Sounds crazy, I know, but I felt compelled to slowly scrutinize that area too. It was a pretty simple area, but given how long it was and how fast you're normally diving through it, I felt it was still worth a search. I mean, there could have been a sneaky hole in the wall somewhere for all I knew. Is it clear enough that I developed crippling OCD by this point? That's pretty much all I gotta say about Lanayru Wetlands / West Necluda though. And then after that region, I moved southwest to Mount Lanayru. And this place was interesting. Like, initially I thought it would be really hard because at first glance, it seemed really similar to Hyrule. Turns out it wasn't though. I mean, sure, it had the snow, it had the mountainous terrain too, but its overall structure was a lot simpler and more open than Hyrule. Like, Hyrule was comprised of a massive series of cliffs which shot up here, there, and everywhere in like 100 different directions. Mount Lanayru, on the other hand, was for all intents and purposes just one huge cliff that went up and only up. Or mostly anyway. I'm kind of generalizing there. I mean, technically there were other smaller mountains around Mount Lanayru, but those didn't really feel like mountains to me. They felt more like hills, because they were a lot easier to traverse, you know? And they didn't block my view as much as mountains usually did. And Mount Lanayru also, fortunately, didn't have many of those hard-to-see ledges hidden under cliff faces that my map hated. Which I know, you're probably getting sick of my mentioning that by now, but I can't help it. Those kinds of spots absolutely plagued me during my challenge. They were so hard to find. So yeah, Mount Lanayru was much nicer to me than I expected. I wouldn't exactly say it was easy to explore since there was a lot of snow and slippery terrain there, but it was certainly easier compared to other mountain ranges in Hyrule. And then from there, I made my way south to East Necluda, and that was another big region that took a while to search, but it wasn't too bad since it was pretty open for the most part. A couple places there which threw me for a loop though. The first was this big precipice far east of the region. I got a bit hung up there because I felt like I had to search all these super small ledges along that cliff which looked like prime hiding places for Koroks. There was only one of those guys there in the end though. He was near the top. And then there was the cliffside cave located just a bit further north of that precipice. Now, I didn't have that much trouble finding this cave, but it took me a while to get into it. Why? Well, there was a big wall blocking it off, and the way the game wanted you to bypass it was really out there. Like, you basically just had to whistle in front of the cave for the wall to lift, but the only way you knew to do that was by buying a blind tip from a certain NPC. Like, it was one of those, hey, if you pay me this much money, I'll tell you a secret sort of things. And I just thought that was dumb, so I didn't buy that tip until way later in the game. But since I didn't buy that until way later, I also didn't know how to open that cave until way later. And then there was this big plateau far west of the region. I actually missed a korok on the very tip of that spot that I had to backtrack for later. I'll talk more about that guy in another more relevant place, though. And then one last place in this region, Hateno Village. Now, nothing there necessarily stumped me, thankfully, but I did have to pay a lot of attention to my surroundings while exploring there, because the village was really densely packed, and it was easy to miss stuff. Like, there were tons of shops, wells, and other notable sites that I needed to find for map completion. The good news, though, is that I remembered the general layout of the village from Breath of the Wild. So, you know, while it was occasionally tricky to stay oriented there, I was mostly able to find my way around without too much trouble. And then after leaving East Necluda, I made my way to Faerun. And this place was fun. Like, it was definitely my favorite region to explore in the game. And that's not to say it was easy at all, it wasn't. I mean, the surface area was massive, there were trees everywhere blocking my view, the sky vomited rain and lightning non-stop, and the place was crammed to the brim with map discoveries around every corner. All that being said, though, it was an absolutely beautiful region. Like, the scenery with all its lush greenery was just breathtaking to me, and I couldn't get enough of it, honestly. And that's not to say that the other regions didn't have nice scenery, they absolutely did. But there was just something about all the rich, thriving foliage in Faerun which especially appealed to me. I don't know, I guess I just love nature. Anyway though, as you might expect, Faerun was another region that took me a long time to scour. It didn't feel like that long because, you know, I was having such a fun time there, but honestly I think I was scouring that place for like 3 or 4 days. That went well though, all things considered. Like, despite the rain, lightning, trees, and how much stuff there was to find in Faerun, I don't recall missing anything there. Like, I'm pretty sure I got everything in one really thorough pass. Except maybe for the excavation sites which were linked to the 5th Sage story quest. As for specific places in Faerun which gave me trouble, well, aside from the whole forest area where I had to deal with all the rain and lightning, I think the Dea Village ruins deserves a mention. That place didn't kill me by any means, mind you, but it was a little tricky, mainly because there were a lot of wells there that I had to find, like 7 or 8 to be precise. And you know, wells were pretty small and they didn't stand out much in the landscape, so they weren't the easiest things to find. Not the hardest either, but you know, you had to keep an eye out for them. As for the sky area of Faerun, well, buckle up, folks, because I got a story to tell you there. So, you know how before you complete the Ring Ruin story quest, that area is completely engulfed in the thickest, most turbulent storm cloud ever? Well, guess what? I decided I didn't care about that. That's right. Believe it or not, I actually attempted to explore that entire series of islands before clearing the storm cloud. And that, I assure you, was every bit of the terrible idea it sounds like. Heck, I'm actually willing to call it the worst idea I had in my whole playthrough. Why exactly? Well, because with the storm cloud in effect, A, I was unable to view most of the Thunderhead Isles on the map, B, rain and lightning chased me literally everywhere I went, and most importantly, C, I couldn't see squat in the resulting fog. Or mostly anyway. I mean, I did figure out I could extend my field of vision a tiny bit by activating Ultra Hand, but that really didn't help that much. It kinda just kept me from falling off platforms by accident. Sorry, 5th day recording. It's a lot of work. But how exactly did I progress through that storm cloud if the exploration conditions were so bad? Well, honestly, I just went super slowly and made sure to pay extra close attention to my surroundings. Like, for example, I found that by watching where the rain fell, I could deduce where most of the islands I had to explore were. Because, like, even if I couldn't see a certain island itself, I could usually see a slight outline of rain splashing on that island. And that, of course, would tell me where it was. As you could imagine, though, it took me forever to comb that whole area going so slowly and cautiously. I did do it in the end. But I seriously think I was grinding that place for over 5 hours. And I want to stress just how big the Thunderhead Isles are. Like, for a sky territory, it is massive. I mean, it may be a bit hard to tell on the map because a lot of the islands overlap with each other, but there are seriously over 50 individual islands making up that place. So what got into me then? Like, why'd I insist on exploring this incredibly complex area when the exploration conditions were just god-awful? Well, part of it was that I didn't know at the time there was a way to lift the storm cloud. I mean, when I first found that area, I hadn't yet met the criteria to start the Ring Ruins quest, and obviously I couldn't look up anything. That was only a small part of the why, though. I mean, honestly, even though I couldn't confirm it at the time, I had a pretty good hunch there was some way to improve the weather. I mean, it was just really hard for me to believe that a cloud that thick, which you could barely see through, was normal, you know? So then what were my main reasons for exploring in that storm? Well, here's the scoop. Number one is just my gaming nature to explore places as early as possible, even if the conditions are harder. Like, no joke, I'm the kind of gamer that will always try getting through a super dark cave without the HM flash ability. Why? Well, I don't know, just cause I can. What do you want me to say? And number two, well, not gonna lie, it was for the lols again. And by that I mean that I kinda just wanted to do another crazy thing for the sake of craziness, you know? Like, the thought of scouring this huge area in conditions that rendered exploration almost impossible was honestly just too amusing for me to pass on. And then, you know, bragging rights. Like, I also just really wanted to be able to say that I did something so stupid. Cause like, who in their right mind would actually believe that, you know? Having said all that though, you might be surprised to learn like me that there actually weren't that many map discoveries in that realm. Like there were only 2 shrines, 2 capsule machines, 2 koroks, and 2 named locations to be found among all those 50 plus islands, and I want to say I found all those on my first go, thanks mostly to my Korok mask and shrine radar. So yeah, basically I got everything there that I had to find in one pass, storm be darned. Not bad for a shot in the dark, right? All the same though, when I finally did lift that storm cloud later in my playthrough, I decided to go through those islands a couple more times. Cause obviously again, I had no way to know for sure I was finding everything there. And Thunderhead Isles was another one of those places which was just like, so complex that I couldn't help thinking there had to be more stuff there. So yeah, I ended up getting a bit hung up in that area too. And then after Thunderhead Isles, I found myself taking on Minero's main quest in the depths below Farron. Which, by the way, the existence of that quest completely surprised me. Like, I was not expecting at all to find a 5th main story arc in Tears when Breath of the Wild only had 4. And what surprised me even more was that I came across it completely by accident. Like, I wasn't guided there by the plot at all, I just stumbled upon it incidentally while searching Farron for my challenge. Obviously though, I loved that. Like, I so appreciated the freedom the game gave me to access that place completely on a whim. It just really spiced up my gameplay experience, you know? Cause remember, I hadn't cleared all the other 4 story arcs in the game at that point. I still had Richu to help out in Gerudo Desert. So technically I shouldn't have been able to just jump to the 5th quest like that, but I did anyway. Just because it happened to be close by, and the game let me do that. Which was just amazing in my mind. Like, I'm telling you guys, that's the kind of freedom that makes me love video games. Anyway though, Minero's quest was lots of fun. See, I appreciated that arc a ton because it had some super unique segments which really freshened up the gameplay for me. Like, I thought it was just so cool when I got to go romping around in the depths in my own freaking mecha and everything. And then at the end, I had to square off against a mecha boss in a freaking boxing ring. Like, seriously people, it doesn't get much more awesome than that. And in terms of difficulty, I'd say this quest was a bit trickier than the others. Mainly because A, I didn't have a dungeon map to guide me through the various depots where Minero's construct limbs were stored, and B, there were a lot of tough gloom monsters on the path to the Spirit Temple. It wasn't that rough on me overall though, since I was pretty strong by this point in my adventure. That was pretty much it for Farron though, and then after Farron, I moved on to Gerudo Desert. And let me tell you man, this place was a breath of fresh air for me, and I know it sounds weird to say that about a literal desert, but it honestly was. And here's why. Since the vast majority of Gerudo Desert was made up of sand plains that were super flat and super open, it was an insanely easy region to explore. Sure, there were some mountains to the east of the region, and those were harder, but thankfully I didn't find them anywhere near as hard as the mountains in northern Hyrule, because they were a lot smaller. And also, by the time I got to Gerudo Desert, I think I was just way more used to traversing mountains. As for other tricky places in Gerudo Desert, 2 main areas jump to mind. Number 1, Gerudo Town, because that was a more complex space with several levels to explore and lots of obscure little shops, rooms, and passageways to find in awkward spots. And number 2, the outside of the Lightning Temple, because that structure was just gargantuan and I felt compelled to make tracks around every single level of it to avoid missing stuff there, which obviously took a while. Turns out there were only treasure chests there in the end though, so yeah. And speaking of the Lightning Temple, let me get into the story section of this region. So I'd say the Riju's quest was probably my favorite of the 4 main story quests, because it was a lot more focused on action and combat as opposed to running around looking for stuff. I mean, yeah, I had to find those 3 light pillars at the end to open up the Lightning Temple, but before that the quest was pretty much just all about fighting off zombies, which was really fun. And the Lightning Dungeon was cool too, although I honestly don't have much to say about that place that I haven't already said about the other dungeons. I mean, it was fun, interesting, and very well designed. Love the boss fight in particular, but I didn't really feel the need to explore there crazy thoroughly for my challenge. Cause again, I knew I wasn't going to find any map discoveries there. After all, it was a dungeon, and with the exception of Hyrule Castle, I hadn't found any map discoveries in any dungeon I'd been to up to that point. Like, they were just treasure chests, and those didn't count toward map completion. Although, like I said earlier in this video, it's possible that the special rooms in the Lightning Temple, like the Room of Hopeful Light, were named locations that counted towards map 100%. I have no way to know if they were, though. But again, I wasn't going to miss them anyway, since I had to find those places to clear the dungeon. And again, that was my experience both in Breath of the Wild and Tears so far. So yeah, wasn't that compelled to obsess over the Lightning Temple. Like, I pretty much just focused on getting to the end of that place and beating the boss, which, you know, was simple enough. And with that done, I proceeded to make my way to the last region on my list, Gerudo Highlands. And how was I feeling at this point? Well, on one hand, as you might expect, I was pretty proud of myself. After all, I knew I'd come a really long way in this crazy challenge of mine. At the same time, though, I was also kind of worried. Well, I'd actually been kind of worried for a while up to that point. Let me explain. See, when I got to Gerudo Highlands, I found about 930 Korok seeds. Now, I didn't know for sure, but I suspected there to be 999 seeds in Tears altogether. Why? Well, dumb reason here, but because that's how many I thought were in Breath of the Wild. Turns out I remembered that wrong, though. There were actually only 900 seeds in that game. But whatever, that's what I thought, however stupid it was. Anyway, though, because I thought there'd be 999 seeds in Tears, that technically meant I had about 69 more seeds to find by the time I got to Gerudo Highlands. And that number was just a little too high for my liking. Like, I just didn't know if I'd be able to find all those remaining seeds in Gerudo Highlands by itself. I really wanted to believe I would, though, because by this point, I felt like I'd milked the other regions dry. Like, I'd done so much exploring and re-exploring throughout the rest of the world by then. So if that last bunch of Koroks wasn't in Gerudo, then I knew I'd have to go over the entire map with a fine-tooth comb to find them. And needless to say, I really didn't want to do that. Like, that whole idea suggested nothing but a super crazy needle in a haystack hunt that would drive me bananas. So yeah, as I made my way through that last region, I was kind of just hoping and praying that I'd conveniently run into every last Korok I needed there. And that may come off as overly wishful thinking, but it didn't seem that unlikely to me at the time. After all, I found about 70 to 80 Koroks in Hyrule Field North, Faron, Lanayru Great Spring, and Lanayru Wetlands / West Necluda, so who's to say there couldn't be that many in Gerudo Highlands too? I wasn't positive about anything though, because here is the other side of the coin. The total number of Koroks hiding in each region varied wildly in my experience. Like, sometimes I'd find 90 Koroks in a single region, and other times there'd be under 40. So it was really impossible for me to say how much success I would have finding those last 69 Koroks in Gerudo Highlands. And that's ultimately why I say I was worried when I got to that last region. Like, I just didn't know how things would pan out with the Koroks by the time I got out of there. And assuming I didn't find all those little guys in that place, I really wasn't eager to start dissecting Hero's Path. Like, I knew that would take for freaking ever, especially given how extensively I'd been exploring up to that point. But yeah, that's more or less what was running through my head at the time. I'll come back to the Korok quest in a minute though. For now I want to talk a bit about how difficult that last region was to explore. So Gerudo Highlands was another mountainous region with lots of deep snow that slowed me down and towering cliffs which blocked my view of things. Despite those issues though, I actually didn't have that much trouble traversing it. And I think that was for the same reason I found the mountains in Gerudo Desert pretty manageable too. Like, I think at this point I just gotten really used to exploring mountains, you know? I mean, heck, by then I'd spent dozens upon dozens of hours combing the likes of Hebra, Eldin, and Lanayru, so, you know, suffice to say I'd had plenty of time to adapt. There were at least 2 spots I got hung up on in that region, though. The first was the Yiga clan hideout. Why? Well, because I had no way to pick up on Koroks that could have been there. Like, I was forced to wear a full Yiga suit while I was in that place, or else the Yiga soldiers would throw me out. And that meant that I couldn't equip my Korok mask, which in turn meant that I had no Korok radar, which in turn again meant that any of those little guys that were in that place I had to just use my eyes and ears to find. And that was a bit of a hassle. I mean, I wasn't going crazy over it. The Yiga clan hideout was pretty small, and there weren't that many places for Koroks to hide in there, but it was kind of hard to trust just my eyes and ears when it came to finding those little guys, you know? There actually weren't any Koroks in that place at the end of the day, though, so chalk that up to more time wasted. And then the other spot that I found kind of tricky was the area surrounding this huge chasm to the south of the region. Reason being that there were lots of stray, awkward ledges along this big spiraling path here, and I felt like I had to inspect all of them or else I'd miss stuff. That turned out to be another fruitless search, though. There was nothing there either. Okay, so there's that. And now it's time to answer the big question here. When I finally wrapped up my exploration of Hyrule Highlands, how many of the entire game's koroks had I managed to find? Gotta say, I'm really curious what you're all thinking here. Hey, if you feel like it, comment down below with your guess as to what my final korok count was after Hyrule Highlands. I would love to know. I'm not gonna keep you in suspense though, I'm just gonna say the answer. So in total, the number of koroks I managed to find was... 984.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Yeah, that's right, 984, i.e., not all of them. And with that, my heart sank, not even gonna lie. I mean, sure, obviously I expected that outcome a bit, given just how many koroks there were to find in that massive world, but I still couldn't help being bummed, because, like, that result sealed my fate. Like, I knew then and there that despite everything I'd been through up to this point, I'd have to go on a needle in a haystack hunt for those remaining koroks. And again, that was the last thing I wanted to do. Like, I was trying so hard to avoid that scenario throughout my whole adventure. You guys have no idea. But hey, you know, it wasn't all grim tidings. I mean, the good news was that I was able to check a lot of other map discoveries off my list at that point. Like, after leaving Hyrule Highlands, I discovered that I found all 152 shrines, 15 Skyview towers, 58 wells, 194 caves, 12 Tears of the Dragon, 12 ancient tablets, and 5 Great Fairy Fountains. And I'd also found all chasms, device dispensers, and town settlements and stables, but I didn't know that at the time. Also, I got all 81 of Addison's signs, but those didn't count towards map completion. And in case you're wondering how exactly I verified without a guide that I completed those categories, well, here's the deal. The game gives you special rewards when you clear most of those goals. Like finding all the shrines gets you the weird ancient hero costume, finding all the wells gets you the All's Well snow globe, finding all the ancient tablets gets you the Zonai survey team fabric, you get the idea. So yeah, that was cool. Like, it was neat to know I could just straight up stop looking for all that stuff after so long. And that somewhat softened the blow I took from the Korok Hunt. Like, I guess I just felt like, okay, I do have to go back and hunt for more koroks, but on the flip side, I don't have to search for all this other stuff anymore. It was still a hard pill to swallow though. Like, honestly, I didn't even know where to begin looking for those last few leaf heads. I knew I had to resume hunting somewhere eventually though, so in the end, here's what I decided to do. I'd go back to the regions I explored earliest in the game where I noticed the most gaps in my Hero's Path trail, which also had lots of easy to miss layers, and, you know, see what I found there. And that compelled me to revisit 2 places in particular, the Great Sky Islands and Hebra Mountains. Now for the record, I backtracked to both of these places several times throughout my adventure, and that's why initially it was tempting for me to assume I'd found everything there, even if the places did fit all the above criteria. Considering the matter further though, I realized I could easily be wrong. Because see, most of that backtracking happened pretty early during my challenge, and since it was pretty early, I came to think it was likely that I'd never scoured those regions as thoroughly as I could have with my exploration strat. Because, you know, like I said before, it took me a while to refine that strat. Like, the longer I played the game, the more tips, tricks, and tools I picked up, which allowed me to be more thorough in my searches. So yeah, with that in mind, I went back to those areas to see what I could see. And turns out my hunches were right on the nose. Like, believe it or not, after exploring Hebra again, this time with more experience, I managed to find a whopping 6 new koroks. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but that was huge for me, let me tell you. Because that was like a third of all the remaining koroks in the game that I turned up in just 1 region. Actually, 2 regions. I didn't realize it at the time, but a number of those koroks were actually in Tabantha Tundra in addition to Hebra Mountains. And I'm a bit foggy on where exactly I found all those Hebra guys, but I remember at least 4 of them. There was this one at the top of a barren tree next to Gotham's secret hot spring. Then there was this one in a korok stump stuck to the underside of a cliff below Mount Drina, which was super easy to miss because of its awkward position. And then there was this 2-in-1 backpack korok here, which... Okay, honestly, I have no idea how I missed that one. I mean, he was standing there right out in the open next to a shrine, so... What the heck passed me? Then I went back to the Great Sky Islands, and you know, there wasn't as much going on there as I expected, but I was happy to find at least 1 new korok in those parts. And that fella was underneath a platform below a pile of breakable rocks in the floor. And I totally get how I missed that one initially, by the way. It's because on the map, the island he's on is completely eclipsed by this much bigger island directly above it. And with that, I had 7 more koroks under my belt, which dropped my total count up to 991 in about 3 days' time. And that was fantastic to me, honestly. Like, given how big Hyrule was and how few koroks there were left to find, I thought it would take me over a week to get up to that number. See, I lucked out because so many of those leaf heads ended up being in just one region, Hebra. My luck kinda took a dive from there, though. Like, moving on from Hebra and the Great Sky Islands, I seriously struggled finding koroks. Like, the hunt was really slow going after that point as I warped from one place to another while finding absolutely nothing 99 out of 100 times. And it was because of that I had to be just super patient going forward. Like, way more than even before, because those koroks were becoming like 100 times harder to locate. Like, it was quickly changing from a game of find the needles in a haystack to find the hairs in a straw field. So yeah, moving ahead was just a real drag for my morale, not even gonna lie. And it got to be quite a strain physically too, especially for my eyes, because like, in order to narrow down where I should search next, I had to just pore over the game's map. Like, I felt the need to study it crazy closely to find gaps in my trail up to that point. And I'd be at that for a really long time. Like, I almost want to say I spent more time inspecting the map than actually re-exploring places. And that's saying a lot, believe me. Yep, 6th day of recording. I swear I'm watching this strip, by the way. But hey, you know, it wasn't all bad news. I mean, on the flip side, going on that extended hunt allowed me to take in even more of Hyrule's beauty. And I really don't want to undermine that, because seriously, this is an absolutely gorgeous game with so many sights that will just take your breath away. And yeah, sure, obviously the longer I played the game, the less of an impact those sights made on me, but man, I gotta say, you know, the magic never left me. Like, even in the drier, more boring periods, I still found myself snapping screenshots and taking videos of the game's scenery. And I was doing that right up until I put the game down for good, actually, because the landscapes in it were just that timelessly beautiful to me. So yeah, that was another silver lining in the cloud. And then, you know, it was also just really cool to feel like I was establishing this super close connection to this incredible world. Because, you know, the longer I spent wandering around the game looking for koroks, the better I got to know Hyrule as a whole. Like, over time, I just found myself committing so much of this vast land to memory, like, just because I was exploring it so much. And I gotta say, I took pride in that. Like, and maybe it sounds kind of conceited, but I just got a lot of satisfaction from the thought that I was actually memorizing all these super large and super complex landscapes in the game. Like, it was just a really epic feeling, you know? Kind of made me feel like I was taming this huge legendary beast that nobody thought could be tamed, including me at the beginning. So yeah, again, it wasn't all bad news. Like, there were some upsides to searching for koroks for way too long. All the same though, in order not to get too bored with the Korok Hunt, I did occasionally feel compelled to step away from that quest and do other stuff in the game. And fortunately, there was still a decent amount of stuff to do. Like, this late into my playthrough, you might think I found just about everything I had to find except the koroks, but actually I didn't. There was still a good number of named locations, light routes, and other minor things I had yet to track down. And then there was other stuff that I didn't really have to do for map 100%, but I wanted to do anyway. Like, you know, collecting all the clothing and armor pieces, finding as many key items as I could, completing the side quests, and, well, finishing the main story. Because yes, as weird as it may sound, I still hadn't done that yet, even at 991 koroks. And I do realize that sounds really weird, especially to those of you who know that the map percentage counter doesn't show up in tiers until you beat the main story. So you're probably wondering, like, what gives? Like, if I couldn't see my completion percentage until that late in the game, how would I know how much progress I was making in my challenge up to that point? Well, another dumb reason here, but basically I didn't know. Like, I was just blindly searching for stuff all that time. And you might think that was a pain, but honestly, I didn't think anything of it then. I mean, I found that I didn't really need that counter until the home stretch when I had to verify how close I was coming to map 100%, you know? Also, if you're wondering how I knew I'd be able to see the map percentage upon beating the game, well, that was a thing in Breath of the Wild too. And also, speaking of the last story quest, I've decided not to speak of the last story quest. I was going to initially because I talked about all the others, but then I realized those experiences weren't that relevant to my challenge, at least not so far as I could tell. Like, all you really need to know there is that I loved all those last boss fights, especially the final one. Like, wow, talk about an absolutely incredible setting. Also, are we still paused? Sorry about that, let's get on with the story. So yeah, during those Korok dry spells, I took the opportunity to tie up some of those loose ends. Unfortunately though, turns out there wasn't nearly enough of that other stuff to balance out the Korok Hunt. Like, Believe it or not, I was still looking for koroks long after I managed to complete the story, find all those miscellaneous map discoveries, etc. And that brings me to the final stage of my hunt. So again, tracking down those last few koroks was a really long, drawn-out ordeal. With enough patience and persistence, however, I was able to slowly but surely make progress. How much progress exactly? Well, playing the game for about 8 hours every day, I'd say that on average I was finding like one korok every 2 to 7 days. And where exactly did I find those remaining koroks in the end? Well, here's the breakdown. So the first korok of this last batch, which was number 992, I found in a pile of red leaves right in between Istakala Stable and its respective shrine. And I'll be real, I have no clue how I missed this one before. I mean, it was in a really open area right next to 2 prominent landmarks, and one of those landmarks was a warp point, for crying out loud. So theoretically, I should have found it a lot sooner than I did. And same thing with 993, which, crazily enough, was actually only about 100 steps to the southeast of 992. I can't believe I overlooked that guy either. I mean, his puzzle was kind of obscured by a hill, to be fair, but it was a really big puzzle, so I feel like I should have seen it a long time ago. You know, now I'm thinking I just didn't explore Istakala as well as I thought. And then I found 994 just a little bit north of Thunder Plateau in the middle of 3 logs that formed a triangle. And you guessed it, that was another spot that I was baffled I didn't explore eons ago. Why? Well, mostly because it was another super flat open area, like there was nothing standing in the way of those logs at all. I mean, I guess it's possible that the Thunder Plateau or the mushroom trees blocked my view, but I don't know, that seems like kind of a stretch to me. Then again, though, this was another one of the earlier areas I combed, so anything could have happened, honestly. Remember, it took me a while to figure out the best way to explore thoroughly. As for 995, well, that was actually the Dueling Peaks korok I mentioned earlier. This one, to be precise. It was in a log cork on a small ledge on the south peak. And I'm not surprised at all I missed that one on my first pass. Like, A, it was way too far for my korok mask to detect it from either the top or bottom of that peak. B, it was in a super awkward spot along a massive mountain. And C, its location was completely obscured by the map. As for 996, which was another one I mentioned earlier, yeah, I found that korok on this plateau to the east of Lake Floria. And at first I didn't quite get how I missed him either, but after reevaluating the landscape a bit, it kinda made sense to me. See, there was a whole other level directly underneath that plateau, which I had to search in addition to the top level. And I can only guess that on my first pass, I ended up mixing up parts of my bottom trail with my top trail in Hero's Path. Because again, remember, Hero's Path doesn't track different levels of your trail, it just displays all your progress on one plane. Sorry, I know you're getting sick of hearing that by now, but I can't help myself. And that, of course, would have led to my not combing the top of that plateau very thoroughly, which in turn would have led to my missing that korok. Or that's what I'm guessing anyway. Hopefully that makes sense. Also, it didn't help that that little guy was so high up that my mask couldn't detect it from the bottom of that plateau. And then there was 997, which I found on a super small ledge along one of Eldon's many cliff faces. And let me say, I actually totally get how I missed this one. Like, it was just in a crazy tricky spot. And I say that for 3 reasons. Firstly, the map didn't show that spot at all, because it was on an underlayer, obviously. Secondly, the ledge was positioned so awkwardly that you really couldn't see it from a normal walking position. Like, it was so far up and tucked so tightly into that cliff that you'd have to be gliding pretty close to the mark to notice it. And thirdly, it was too far out of the way for my korok mask to detect it from either the bottom or top of that cliff. Well, unless I got really close to the edge anyway, and actually, that's how I found that korok at the end of the day. Like, eventually, I just happened to wander close enough to that edge from the bottom, and then finally my mask sprung off. And then after 997, I found nothing for about a week, and at that point, that was the longest stretch of time that I'd gone without finding a korok. At the end of that week, though, I was pleased to turn up 998. And that one was a real wild card for me, like, seriously, of all the koroks I ended up missing on my journey, I think this one surprised me most. Where was it exactly? Well, it was just chilling out on a tree towards the back of the Forgotten Temple. Not just any tree, though. We're talking a super conspicuous tree. Like, this thing stood out like a sore thumb in the temple. Cause see, there wasn't much foliage in that place at all. It was mostly just dark stone walls. So how'd I end up overlooking such an obvious korok then? Well, honestly, I'm not completely sure. Again, it still kind of baffles me, like, especially since I know I explored that place at least twice before. If you were to force me to come up with a theory, though, then I have 2 guesses. Firstly, that tree was pretty high up from ground level, and that again could have thrown off my korok mask. And secondly, towards the front of the temple, there was another tree which didn't have a korok, which looked exactly like the tree which did. Like it was the same size and shape, and it was growing out of the wall from the same weird lopsided position. So I'm basically thinking that because the two trees look so similar, I ignored the one in the back, thinking it was the same one from the front, which I most likely inspected earlier and found nothing near it. Keep in mind that the Forgotten Temple is a super huge and super open space, and in places like that, your sense of distance tends to get thrown for a loop. Whatever the case though, let me tell you, I was psyched beyond belief when I finally did uncover that korok. And that actually goes for most of the endgame koroks, by the way. Like, each one was really hard to find, they took a ton of time and energy to track down, but as soon as I found one, I'd get just the biggest adrenaline rush, and that rush always renewed my energy for the hunt. That said, however excited I was to find endgame koroks in general, I was like 100 times more pumped when I found 998 specifically. Because according to my calculations, that was the second to last korok. And that meant that I was officially only one little step away from the insane feat of completing the entire map without looking up anything. Or mostly anyway. I mean, I still had about 30 light roots to find, and a number of named locations too, but I knew I could find those anytime within like a few days, so they didn't really count in my mind at the time, you know? So I knew I was in the home stretch now, and man, let me tell you, that was an absolutely surreal thing to realize. Like, I genuinely couldn't believe how far I'd come and how close I was to this goal that I never thought I could pull off in a million years. And to drive home just how surprised and excited I was, let me show you this video I recorded just seconds after finding Korok 998. Enjoy. I am filming this video super late at night. Some people are sleeping around here. I probably shouldn't be talking too loud, but I just had to come in real quick and say, I just got the 998th Korok in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I can't even believe it. I'm not there yet. Not 999 yet, but you know, it's just now setting in for me that I'm on the edge of this accomplishment now. Like, I am so close to getting all 999 koroks, every single korok in the game, in the grand land of Hyrule, without looking up a single thing. Like, totally on my own. It's crazy. Like, this is just now setting in, guys. It's oh my god. Like, just the thought that there's only one more korok left in the grand land of Hyrule. And I know just how huge this world is now, having gotten 998 of these guys. And a lot else besides that, but I can't even believe this. I'm getting there, guys. I am actually going to get there, and it's going to be a crazy accomplishment. I'm going to be losing my mind at the end of this, but yeah, just wanted to come in real quick and share my excitement for the final video when I finally reach 100%. It's gonna be crazy. Oh, let's give it a little bit of proof here. There you are. As you can see, the screen says 998 koroks. We're almost there. So yeah, as you can see, I was just bursting with glee when I found that korok. Like, I was so excited that I almost couldn't even sleep that night. And let me tell you, the satisfaction I gleaned from that discovery gave me so much energy for the last stage of my challenge. Like, seriously, after that milestone, I felt like I could go on scouring Hyrule for dozens of hours yet without needing a break. So yeah, the following day when I sat down to resume my adventure, I was ready to grind like never before. Like, I was officially done wasting time. Knowing I was so close now to my goal made me want to double and even triple down on the Korok quest. So that's exactly what I did. Then a few days passed, nothing. Then a week passed, still nothing. Then 2 weeks passed, even more nothing. Then 3 weeks passed, and yep, you guessed it, even more nothing. And at that point, I'm not gonna lie, I was getting worn out. Because I did so much exploring in that game in that 3 weeks. Like, I probably warped to over 1,000 different spots and went over 100 more hours of gameplay. And I'd also found every other map discovery in the game too, even that last bunch of light routes and named locations. And it was just like, after all that, I seriously felt like I was exhausting every tool in my kit. Like, Korok 999 just wasn't showing up for me, no matter how hard I searched for him. And now my problem was that I was quickly running out of places to explore. Like, after 3 weeks of constant grinding, I was seriously hard-pressed to find any spot on the map that looked even slightly like a new Korok hiding spot. Like, I felt like I'd covered all the bases already. But hey, surely the situation wasn't that bad, right? I mean, all that basically meant was that I had to be more patient with the process. And I had time to be patient, right? I mean, after all, it's not like I was finding a hidden clock in the game that was making my challenge harder the longer I played. Or was I? Okay, now we're gonna get into the really frustrating part of my challenge here, and it had to do with Hero's Path mode. So like I said before, there was a lot to like about Hero's Path, but there was also a lot to dislike about it. And here's the thing I came to dislike the most about that feature. After 256 hours, it was designed to erase your older tracks on the map to make room for newer tracks. And that became a huge problem as I was looking for 999, because at that point in my playthrough, I was easily going over 256 hours. Although showing the playtime on my Switch profile isn't the best proof of that, because we're talking 256 hours of trail here, not playtime. I'm showing this screen anyway, though, just to give you some idea of how long I was exploring. Do keep in mind, though, that a lot of that playtime was just my looking at the map in the game, which, of course, doesn't translate to trail time. And that basically meant that the longer I hunted for that Korok, the more my exploration progress vanished from the map, and the harder it was for me to keep track of everywhere I'd searched for that little guy. And that made for a really vicious cycle, as you can imagine. I mean, it put so much pressure on me to find 999 sooner than I realistically could. Now, I know what you're thinking here. Well, hey man, if you didn't want your tracks vanishing over time, why didn't you just take screenshots and videos to preserve them? And that's a good question, and I did think about that actually, but here's the thing. At the end of the day, I really didn't know how I'd organize a project like that. I mean, the way I saw it, I would have had to take dozens, maybe even hundreds of map photos at the crazy rate I was exploring. And it really just hurt my brain to think about how I'd sort through all that stuff. Like, I felt like I'd be shuffling endlessly through an utter mess of tons of files. And I seriously didn't want to do that. Like, it just seemed like way too much of a hassle at the time, you know? And I don't know, maybe in hindsight I should have taken pictures. Like, perhaps I was making out that process to be way more complicated than it had to be. But hey, whatever, it was what it was. Like, at the end of the day, the fact was I didn't go that route, and, well, that's that. 7th recording. Home stretch, baby. Let me get back on track, though. So, a few more days go by, and I'm still having zero luck with the hunt. And by this time, I'm getting even more stressed out, because, again, Hero's Path is deleting my progress with each passing hour I spend in the overworld. So I knew that some way, somehow, I had to find Korok 999 ASAP. That was easier said than done, though, because, honestly, by this point, I kind of had no idea where to look for that little guy anymore. I mean, by then I'd gone over the entire map from top to bottom multiple times and inspected every last conspicuous gap in my travel route, and he was still nowhere to be found. So seriously, what else was I supposed to do? I mean, the way I saw things, the only way I could expand my search from there would be to conduct a second full sweep of Hyrule. And come on, do you really think I was gonna do that after how long the first one took me? Like seriously, to go through with such a wild idea again, I have to be not just crazy, but daft, loony, off my rocker, out of my head, clinically insane, and stark raving mad! Which I'm very, very sorry to say, I was. Yeah, you can probably see where I'm going with this. So believe it or not, I eventually got so desperate to find 999 that I decided to comb the entire overworld a second time. And what did that mean exactly? Well, it basically meant going back to the very first region I explored, conducting another insanely thorough search of the whole area on foot, and then repeating that process for the other 14 regions in Hyrule. I couldn't scour that world in the exact same way as the first time, though, using my signature edge-trailing exploration strat. I wanted to, but if I did, then it would be way too easy for me to mix up my older trail with my newer trail on the map as I made my way through those regions. So here's the other method I thought of. I just do one big horizontal zigzag from region to region. Like, I'd simply make a huge series of parallel line trails while leaving just enough space in the middle for my mask to detect any Koroks around me wherever I was. And also ensure that whenever I had to descend from a high elevation, I dropped down gradually instead of flying over it. That way my chances were higher that I'd pick up on 999 if he was on a surface directly below that elevation. And I know, nothing about that plan sounds any more appealing than my first strat at all, but hey, look, again, I was desperate. And as crazy as it sounds, this was the best plan I could think of to maximize my chances at finding that Korok. So yeah, with all that decided, I set off on my second hair-in-the-straw field hunt through the great land of Hyrule, starting in Hebra and planning to end in Gerudo Highlands. And how'd that go? Well, to be honest, it wasn't terrible. I mean, sure, I got bored now and then, especially since 99% of the time I was just doing a lot of tedious walking. But at the same time, it was also like, I couldn't help being kind of grateful for another chance to take in the beauty of that world at a slow, relaxing pace, you know? Because if I said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. This game was just a feast for the eyes around every corner. Like, the scenery was just so stunning for me to look at, even after hundreds of hours of playing the game. And while there were, of course, plenty of off days when I wasn't in the mood to appreciate that scenery, it really inspired me in general. And that's why at the end of the day, I can't say that second sweep felt like a total slog, you know? It was another long journey though, not gonna lie. I mean, it wasn't as long as the first one because at this point I was just looking out for one thing. But it was still super long, like, we're talking about 90 more days and a couple hundred more hours here. So even if the second run wasn't as much of a drag as I expected, I still had to be really patient with the process. And that was pretty hard at times, you know? Especially on those aforementioned off days when I just wasn't in the mood to appreciate the game's scenery. But hey, whatever, I eventually saw that job through to the end. And when that end finally came, was a day I'll never forget for as long as I live. Because it marked an absolutely incredible feat. And by that I mean that yes, you guessed it, by the time I reached Gerudo Highlands and finished my second full sweep of Hyrule, I was actually able to find, after a freaking month and a half of relentless searching, absolutely nothing. Get it done! Yep, you heard me right. Even after combing the entirety of Hyrule twice over 700 hours in the most thorough manner I thought possible, I still couldn't find 999. And I know that sounds utterly ridiculous, but I swear to God it's true. I mean, come on, who would make up a story like that, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that can only happen in real life. It's way too wild for fiction. It was fine, though. Like, honestly, I didn't let myself get too worked up over that mishap. I was tempted to at first, I'll admit, but at the end of the day, I just didn't see the point, you know? Like, ultimately I came to the conclusion that, you know, anger never really solves anything. So even though I knew I was dealing with an insane situation at that point, I did my best to maintain a thoroughly mature, positive, and dignified attitude.
Alright, you little whelp, this is your last chance. I know you know where your little friend 999 is hiding, so let me make something crystal clear for you right now. If you don't open up your little mouth and tell me where he is real soon, you're fixing to find yourself in a steaming hot load of Hetsu's next gift. Oh, so you won't talk, huh? Well, don't worry, my little friend. You'll be telling me everything soon enough, and when that time comes, it'll be my turn to laugh. You hear me? I will have the last.
See what I tell you? I mean, let's be real here. That's about the most dignified attitude you can expect in such crazy times. Okay, I'm exaggerating just a bit there, but honestly, not finding 999 on my second full sweep of Hyrule just about blew my mind. Like, that outcome was so wild to me that I honestly started to wonder if I'd been transported to the Twilight Zone or something. Cause seriously, how the blue blazes do you scour a game that freaking thoroughly and still not find the thing you're looking for? Like, the whole scenario just defied all logic to me. Anyway though, by this point, I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to quit. But I couldn't bring myself to quit. And here's why. Despite all the insanity I'd been through up until now, I was still acutely aware that I was so close to my end goal. And the way I saw things, I could still hit that goal at literally any time. I mean, yeah, I know I've been searching for 999 for hundreds of hours now, but what was stopping me from potentially finding him within the next 10 minutes? Like, that little guy could be just around the corner for all I knew. That really sounds like something a chronic gambler would say, doesn't it? Oh well. Probably the smallest of my faults. So yeah, basically I knew I was going to continue my hunt. And as for how I was going to continue, well, for obvious reasons I didn't feel like doing a third full sweep of the game yet, at least not so soon after my second one, so I just decided to warp around the map sporadically for a while. Like, you know, go back to several niche places in the game that still kinda sorta intrigued me and, well, see if I stumbled upon anything. Which I know, not a very surefire plan, but hey, it was low effort and manageable. And that's what I wanted most right after my second sweep. Like, I wanted to take things easier for a while. But you're probably wondering now how exactly I could afford to take things easier with Hero's Path still breathing down my back and deleting my tracks. Well, there's actually a very simple answer for that, and here it is. After a point, I basically just stopped caring about Hero's Path in the map. Because I eventually came to feel like those things weren't helping me anymore. I mean, by the time I finished combing Hyrule twice, I'd spent countless hours poring over Hero's Path for Lee's and 999, and yet I still had nothing to show for it. Also, there was a part of me that was just like, I kinda knew everywhere I'd been to in the game after my second full sweep of it, even without looking at Hero's Path. I mean, I hadn't memorized my entire trail, of course, but like, you can't really play a game like this for several hundred hours and not remember most of the places you explored, you know? Especially when you're actually trying to find almost everything like I was. But anyway, upon resuming my hunt yet again, the first series of places I decided to re-explore were the caves. Why? Well, honestly, I don't even know. Like, I had no reason at all to think there'd be anything there. I'd never found a korok in a cave before, but hey, at this point it was just like, whatever. I gotta start looking somewhere, and I can't say I've ransacked the caves as much as other places, so like, why not, you know? At any rate, it'll be a nice change of scenery. So off I went again, and for the first couple days, that cave search went pretty much exactly how I expected. Like, I found absolutely nothing in the first 30 or so caves I explored in northern Hyrule. But then about 3 days in, while I was exploring Hebra again, something happened that had not happened in a long, long time. Yep, that's right. After what felt like 3,000 long years, my Korok mask finally went off, signaling that 999 was just a stone's throw away from me. And let me tell you, words can't even begin to describe how utterly ecstatic I was by that. Like seriously, the second I heard that beautiful rattling sound of my mask, I was riding a wave of sheer heavenly bliss. It was just the best feeling in the world. But where exactly was that Korok hiding, and how did I find it? Well, I can tell you here, but I think it would be better to show you. So without further ado, I hereby present this video I recorded just seconds after my mask rung off there. Enjoy. I found it! I found the 999th Korok seed, not officially yet, but my mask just rung off, and I can't even believe where I am right now. I'm at the Hebra Great Skeleton right now, so you can shift the screen, Peter. And I'm gonna try to find it right now. Try to find where it exactly is. But, I'm thinking it might be on the tip of the nose of the skeleton here. Just instinct is guiding me over here. It's not. Okay, and my mask just went off again. So, man, this is somewhere. Where is it? It's close, I just don't know where exactly. This thing has a better range than you might think, but it's still pretty lousy when it comes to just the scale of this world. Yeah, the mask is going off. It's gotta be in the cave somewhere, which is, again, it's crazy to me because I had never found a Korok seed in even one of the caves in this game. So, I'm glad I can get this live, honestly. I've just been searching for weeks. Heck, I think it's been like officially going on 2 months now since I found the last Korok seed. Yeah, now it's stopped again. Okay, where is it? This is a massive cave. I mean, as far as caves go, this one is pretty humongous.
Did you try going through the roof? Is that possible?
Yeah, I did go through the roof. I ascended, and maybe I'll try it again just for kicks. Yeah, see, the roof is super large, and my mask goes off almost immediately. You see, it's no longer ringing. So, yeah, so it's not above the ceiling. It's somewhere under here. It kind of boggles my mind because usually I can see it.
NANI?
I found it! It's right there. It's right there. Look. Oh my god, it's right there. It's in the eye of the skeleton. Okay, there we go. 999. Here we go. Look at that. How about that, eh? Yeah, believe it or not, that Korok was just camping out in the cave in Hebra the whole freaking time. And how'd I feel about that? Well, as you can tell from that recording, I was surprised as all heck by the discovery. I'm not going to say I didn't know how I missed it, though, because ultimately I did know. Like, the fact was that after having explored dozens of caves in Hyrule without finding even one Korok in those places, I'd eventually just assumed that caves were no Korok zones, like the depths and the dungeons. And because I came to assume that, I ultimately just stopped looking for Koroks in caves after a point. Like, even when I scoured the map a second time for 999, I completely skipped the caves, because I was so confident based on past experience that they turn up nothing. So basically I let the game lead me into a false sense of security, and in the end, that was the mistake which led to my missing that Korok for so long. My, how wrong we can be sometimes, eh? Anyway though, you can imagine just how psyched I was when I finally did find that little guy. Like, no joke, I was in a state of absolute euphoria. Which I think you can tell just looking at that video, right? Like, I'm just beaming there. It was such an incredible moment. And let me tell you, after begging that Korok, I was so ready to get the heck out of that cave, report my findings to Hetsu, and finally be done with this insane quest for good. I actually didn't end up leaving that cave right away though. I stayed behind a bit longer. Why? Well, because right after collecting 999, I happened to notice something very, very, very strange in that place. And this is really something I can't tell you about. I have to show you, so back to past me. Take a look at this! So I got that Korok, right? But my ass is still ringing! That's so weird. Yep, you heard that right. Somehow, some way, my Korok mask was still ringing off in that cave after I'd found 999. And I didn't know what to make of that at all, let me tell you. I mean, I know I seem to be laughing it off in that video, but I was seriously confused for a bit. Like, I didn't know if my game was bugging out or haunted or what. I wasn't confused for long though, thankfully. About 5 minutes later, the true cause of that phenomenon revealed itself to me. I think that's another thing you want to hear from past me though, so I'll turn you over to him one last time. Enjoy. There's another one! Okay, hold on, I gotta showcase this real quick. I gotta get a better bird's eye view. This is mind-blowing for me. There are 2 here. I thought the whole time, for a month since I found the last Korok seed, I was only looking for 1 more. In Breath of the Wild, there were only 999 Korok seeds. In this game, I'm just learning this right now after finding this little bugger right here. And I was wondering why my mask was going off after hitting this one, which I thought was the last one. There are not 999 Korok seeds in this game. There are 1,000. Side by side. I can't make this up, folks. This is crazy and I can barely even believe myself. You've got it all at Korok seeds. You should tell Hetsu the good news. And I will certainly be telling Hetsu the good news, but you guys got it first. This is it. 1,000 Korok seeds. Completely blind. Like, this is all by myself. I did not look up anything, saw no guides, nothing whatsoever. This is all me. And, man, I'm proud of myself. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Eighth day of recording. Editing this is gonna be so fun. Yep, again, you heard all that right. I know it sounds like the most insane thing in the world, but I truly found not just 1, but 2 Koroks in that cave, hiding right next to each other. And I absolutely could not believe that. Like, to say I was completely and utterly flabbergasted would be the understatement of the millennium. Like, seriously, the whole time I was looking for Korok 999, I thought that was the last Korok. Like, I had no idea there were actually 2 left in the game, and there were 1,000 in total. I mean, how could I? Like, again, I hadn't looked up anything, you know? Honestly, though, I'm glad I didn't know. Like, if I was aware I had 2 more Koroks to find, I think that long hunt for 999 would have been way more painful. But anyway, there actually isn't much more of the story left to tell. I mean, after finding that 1,000th Korok, I basically just made my way over to Hetsu, picked up the ever-flattering Hetsu's gift from him, verified on my map that I did in fact have 100%, which was a super satisfying moment, replayed the final story bits again for finality's sake, and then, well, I put the game down. And I'm not gonna lie, that was a really strange moment for me. I mean, part of me, of course, was relieved to finally shelve this game after 800 long hours, but there was another part of me that just didn't want to let go of such a memorable experience, you know? Because at the end of the day, despite everything, I couldn't deny that Tears of the Kingdom was one of the most beautiful and invigorating games I had ever played. Like, it was more than a game to me. It was a living, breathing fairy tale that just pulled me in and gave me the adventure of a lifetime. I needed to become a part of me by now, you know? Like, in a way, I almost felt like I was married to it because I'd spent so much time with it over the last 5 months or so. So yeah, it wasn't easy stepping away. Like, I genuinely found myself kinda struggling to leave that world behind. Eventually, though, I did. And, you know, when I did, things were fine. Like, I didn't end up that depressed. Why, you ask? Well, I guess because it ultimately hit me that this wasn't really goodbye. It was just a temporary break. Because I knew that I'd revisit Tears again someday, and I didn't know when, and I didn't know how, but I just felt that deep down, our paths were bound. to cross again, purely as a matter of destiny. Also, I knew I'd have to go back to the game to get footage for this video. Okay, all jokes aside though, I was really glad I did that challenge in the end. I mean, yeah, it was crazy, yeah, it definitely tested my patience, but because I did that, I was able to get so much more out of Tears of the Kingdom. And that meant a ton to me, seriously, because again, it's not every day Nintendo puts out an incredible open-world Zelda game like this. And I love Zelda, I always have. Like, ever since I was a little kid, I've just found it to be such a magical series that fires my imagination to boundless heights. And that brings me to the last thing I want to say about that challenge. I truly feel that the only way I was able to pull off that feat, aside from being crazy, was because I love Tears so much. Like, it wasn't due to my being particularly smart, tenacious, or skilled at the game. I wasn't any of those things and never have been. It was just like, I did it simply because I found the game so fun. And you know, at the end of the day, that taught me a really valuable lesson. It taught me that fun can be just as strong of a driving force as skill. Like, even if you don't feel you have the ability to do something, you can still do it provided you're enjoying the process. So yeah, you know the drill, folks. Chase your dreams, have fun with whatever you do, and, you know, don't be afraid to be kind of crazy. Spices things up. And with that, my story finally comes to a close, and let me tell you, I couldn't be happier about that. Like, I've been working so hard on this video for so long. It's actually been over a year now since I started on it, so I'm pooped. Anyway, though, I can't thank you all enough for watching this video. I know it's been really long, maybe even too long, but even if you only watched bits and pieces of it, I'm super grateful to you for your time. Like, no joke, I wish I could reach through the screen and shake each one of your guys' hands individually. Since I can't, though, well, I hope to see you in the comments. Also, kind of late in the game now, but I apologize if some or most of my talk came off as, like, confusing, overly rambly, boring, etc. Not really used to making these kinds of videos, so I imagine there's a lot that feels off. But hey, if there was something that really confused you, you're more than welcome to ask me about it in the comments. I'll be happy to answer any questions I get. For now, though, I think it's high time I stop babbling. I'm sure you're all sick of listening to my voice by now, because I know I certainly am. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, etc. Also, let me know if you want to see more challenges like this. I mean, completing the map in Tears by myself wasn't easy, but hey, if the demand is there, I can try to do more stuff like that in other games. Oh, and on that note, I gotta ask, what's the craziest video game challenge that you guys have ever pulled off? And did you find it fun, or did it get to be a drag after a while? Like, maybe you did a really fast speed run once, or cut through a super tough game without taking a hit. I don't know, it could be anything really, but whatever it is, I'd love to hear your stories down below. Alright, and with that last bit said, I think I can finally wrap up here. So once again, guys, thank you so much for watching this passion project of mine. It means a ton to me, especially since I put so much time into it. And yeah, that's about it. So until next time, guys, stay cool, keep it real, and I'll see you whenever I see you. Take care.